Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere you probably wouldn't choose for your next holiday. The medieval dungeon. The air is damp, the stones are slick, and the torchlight flickers just enough to let your imagination fill in the shadows. And you, lucky soul, are walking straight down those steps. You can feel the cool air rising to meet you, like a cellar crossed with an unwashed sock drawer. Somewhere deep in this labyrinth, you'll be finding out why you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down the worn stone steps, each one slick underfoot. The air changes as you go deeper. It's not just colder, it's thicker. The scent hits before the full darkness does, an unpleasant medley of mildew, old straw, and something sour that might once have been food. You tell yourself it's probably fine. You also lie to yourself sometimes. The guard ahead of you carries a torch, its light barely reaching the low vaulted ceiling. You notice the walls, massive blocks of stone, their mortar blackened by years of smoke and damp. Some stones have names scratched into them. You wonder if the people who carved them ever got out, or if the carving was simply something to do while waiting for whatever came next. In medieval Europe, dungeons weren't always beneath castles like in the movies. Some were converted towers, or even deep cellars in city halls. But here, the stone stairs lead down under a keep, where the cold keeps things preserved. Not in a cheerful, keeps the cheese fresh sort of way, more in the bodies last longer than you'd expect way. The guard's pace is steady, unbothered by the uneven ground. Your own feet stumble over a rut worn by countless other prisoners. Somewhere ahead, you hear the clank of chains and the low murmur of voices. Somewhere below that, the faint squeak and scurry of small, fast feet. Historians still argue whether all medieval dungeons were truly as squalid as legend suggests, or if some were more akin to secure guest rooms for wealthy captives. This, you suspect, is the squalid type. The air itself feels heavy enough to slow your breathing. You touch the wall for balance, and your fingers come away damp and gritty. A torch in an iron bracket throws light over an archway. Beyond it, the corridor narrows, ceiling dipping so low you have to duck. The guard grunts at you to keep moving. You think about the world above, the courtyard you crossed earlier, the smell of baking bread from the kitchens, the faint shouts of someone training with a sword. All of it is now out of reach. Shut behind layers of stone, you pass a recess in the wall where a wooden door stands ajar. Inside, you glimpse a cramped chamber, its floor littered with straw, a single rusted chain bolted to the center. It might be for solitary confinement or for someone awaiting questioning. Either way, you're glad you don't stop there. The flickering light plays tricks. Shadows seem to stretch and shift. Shapes appear and vanish. It's easy to see how someone alone down here might imagine ghostly visitors. In fact, one odd historical tidbit, in some parts of Europe, jailers encouraged these ghost stories, believing fear would keep prisoners docile. Finally, the corridor opens into a wider hall. Iron bars cross an archway, and beyond them, you see figures shifting in the dim. The smell intensifies, sweat, straw, and the unmistakable tang of unwashed bodies. The guard swings the gate open. The iron groans as if reluctant to let you in. You take your first step into the dungeon proper. The sound changes instantly. The outside world's faint echoes vanish, replaced by the drip of unseen water and the dull thud of your own heartbeat in your ears. You can feel eyes on you, though you can't yet see their owners clearly. Somewhere behind you, the gate clangs shut. The sound is final, like a lid closing on a box. You're in. And if the past is anything to go by, you're not going anywhere for a while. The gate has barely stopped vibrating from its slam when you hear boots on stone behind you. The guard isn't done yet. He steps forward, torchlight throwing his shadow across the floor like a giant looming over prey. This, you realize, must be the jailer, the keeper of the keys, the man who decides whether you eat, drink, or get left to quietly marinate in the dark. He's big in the way medieval strongmen often are. Not bodybuilder big, but broad-shouldered from hauling barrels, dragging prisoners, and occasionally shoving someone's head into a bucket of water for discipline. His tunic is dark and stained in ways you decide not to think about. He gives you a once-over that lasts just long enough to be unsettling. This isn't a friendly check-in, it's an assessment. He's measuring your condition, your pockets, which are now empty, and probably your market value if someone decides to ransom you. In some medieval regions, prisoners were technically the jailer's responsibility in more ways than one, meaning if you died in custody, it was his problem, especially if you were worth money. On the other hand, if you were worthless, well, problem becomes a flexible word. He grunts, holds out a thick hand. You got nothing left to give, but that doesn't stop him from patting you down anyway. His fingers find a hidden stitch inside your sleeve, a trick you didn't know your tunic even had, and pull out a small scrap of parchment. It's blank. You swear you don't know where it came from. He stares at you long enough to make your skin itch, then pockets it without a word. Historians still argue whether jailers were uniformly corrupt or just opportunistic. The truth likely varies, but you can tell from his manner that this one is not above reallocating property. In fact, in some towns, the jailer's official salary was so low that he relied on prisoner bribes to supplement it. Pay up, and you might get extra straw or warmer food. Pay nothing, and you might be accidentally left in the coldest corner. He moves on to your boots. In some medieval prisons, boots were a luxury and often confiscated. Not only did this prevent escape attempts, it meant if you did try, your bare feet on icy stone would send you running back. He inspects yours, taps the soles, and gives a slight smirk before handing them back. Apparently, they're not worth stealing yet. Then comes the inventory of your belongings, which at this point is just you. Your belt is taken, your cloak removed, and you're left standing in your tunic under the watchful eyes of both the jailer and a second guard, who has appeared silently, like a cat you didn't hear coming. A table to the side holds a variety of strange items, rusty manacles, a set of keys that look like they could open everything from a treasure chest to a church door, and a ledger whose pages are yellowed and curling. The jailer scratches something in it with a quill that looks older than you. Your name goes down, not in a neat, modern way, but as part of a description. Height, hair, a note about the tear in your sleeve. You're not a person in this book. You're inventory. He calls out a number to the second guard. You don't understand the language fully, but the tone is unmistakable. This is your cell assignment. In some parts of medieval Europe, prisoners were grouped by crime. In others, it was entirely random. You might be with a thief, a debtor, a soldier gone rogue, or someone who insists they can speak to crows. You'll find out soon enough. Before you're moved, he checks your wrists. The iron shackles are heavy and cold, biting into skin that's already starting to chill. You can feel the weight in your shoulders almost immediately. There's no lock click, just a pin jammed through, bent over to hold it in place. The simplicity is almost insulting. One quirky fact: some jailers were surprisingly superstitious about how they restrained prisoners. There are records of left-handed captives being shackled differently, based on the belief that they were more cunning and likely to escape. Yours are on both wrists, evenly, as though he's not worried about cunning, just compliance. When the inspection is over, the jailer leans in close enough for you to smell the ale on his breath. You last longer if you keep quiet, he says. It's not advice, it's a statement. And in this place, statements tend to be less negotiable than you'd like. With a shove between your shoulder blades, you're moving again, deeper into the shadows. The jailer follows, jangling his keys like a soundtrack to your arrival. The air grows even colder, the stone under your feet slicker. The torch sputters, throwing bursts of orange that make the shadows leap and sway. Somewhere ahead, metal grinds against metal, and you know without seeing it that your new life, your inventory status, is about to begin. You can already feel the absence of the world above, the light, the air, the simple knowledge of the sun's position in the sky. Down here, time is measured in footsteps, shouts, and the creak of hinges. And the jailer is very good at all three. You shuffle forward, shackles clinking with each step, until the corridor opens into a narrow row of cells. The torchlight dances over rows of thick iron bars, blackened with age and patched in places where some desperate soul once tested their strength. You glance down the row. No two cells look alike. Some have solid wooden doors with tiny peepholes. Others are wide open to view, their occupants watching like cats behind a fence. The jailer gestures toward a vacant cell halfway down. Vacant is generous. What he means is that no one currently claims it. The straw on the floor is old enough to have developed its own scent, a sharp mix of damp grass and something animal. In the corner sits a wooden bucket. You don't ask. You don't need to. The walls are close, closer than you imagined they would be. You can stretch out your arms and almost touch both sides. The ceiling dips low enough that you could press your palm against the cold stone above your head. Moisture seeps from cracks in the masonry, trickling down into tiny channels on the floor that lead to a drain, or maybe just a lower puddle in the next cell. Medieval cells weren't always permanent living spaces. In many towns, they were temporary holding rooms until trial or punishment, which might be the next day or next year. Historians still argue whether overcrowding was as bad in the 14th century as later records suggest. But in this moment, staring at 4 damp walls, you suspect bad is relative. Your shackles are removed with a rusty screech. The relief is instant but brief. Your wrists throb from the pressure, and the skin is already red and raw. The jailer doesn't look at you again. The door swings shut with a deep, resonant clang, and the key turns with a twist that feels unnecessarily loud. Alone now, you take stock of your surroundings. Besides the straw and the bucket, there's one other amenity, a rough woolen blanket folded on the floor. It smells faintly of sheep and something less identifiable, and you suspect it's been used by more prisoners than you'd care to count. Still, the blanket might be the difference between teeth-chattering misery and merely uncomfortable sleep. You settle onto the straw, which pricks through your clothing in a way that's both itchy and oddly comforting. It's not much, but it's something between you and the damp stone. Somewhere outside your bars, you hear the jailer's boots fading away, replaced by a softer, rhythmic drip. You glance toward the source and find a steady bead of water falling from the ceiling into a shallow depression in the floor. You're not sure whether to be grateful for a potential water source or deeply concerned about what else drips through medieval ceilings. There's movement in the next cell over. A shift of straw, a low cough. A hand, pale in the flickering light, slides into view, gripping the bars. The fingers are thin, the nails chewed down. No words come, but the presence is noted. You have a neighbor. Quirky fact: in some prisons, cellmates or neighboring prisoners developed elaborate knock-based languages to communicate without alerting the guards. Whether this was for friendship, trade, or plotting escapes depended entirely on the personalities involved. You wonder how long before you hear your first coded tap. The air is heavy and still. Every small sound carries. The scratch of your own sleeve, the shift of straw, the faint rattle of chains somewhere down the hall. The temperature is constant, a chill that seems to seep into your bones. It's the kind of cold that doesn't bite. It lingers, waiting for your body to surrender heat, bit by bit. The walls bear marks you can't help but study. Tallies scratched into stone, little more than shallow lines worn smooth over years of touch. 5 marks in a group, then another set, and another. Some end abruptly mid-count. Whether those prisoners left early or simply stopped marking, you can't know. A scuttling sound draws your attention to the corner, where a rat, not small, not particularly shy, sniffs around the straw. It pauses to stare at you with glossy black eyes before darting toward the drain. If you were hoping for a pet, this is as close as you're getting. Historians still debate whether medieval dungeons were infested to the degree popular fiction suggests. But here, in the stale air with that smell in the straw, the question seems more academic than useful. You lean back against the wall, the cold pressing through your spine. There's a strange comfort in knowing the walls have stood here for centuries. They've seen prisoners before you, and they'll see prisoners after. It's a shared history, though not one you volunteered for. Somewhere beyond the bars a torch crackles, and you hear the low rumble of a guard's voice, indistinct, but with the rhythm of someone telling a joke. The laugh that follows is short, sharp, and without mirth. The sound bounces off the stone and fades into the silence. You pull the blanket over your shoulders, its scratchy fibers catching on your tunic. This is your space now, however temporary. 4 walls, 1 mat of straw, and a bucket. Luxury, by dungeon standards. It doesn't take long for you to realize you aren't actually alone in here. Not truly. You'd already spotted the pale hand in the neighboring cell earlier, but now the shape behind it stirs, shifting toward the bars. The dim torchlight outside catches a face, thin, with deep lines around the eyes. the sort you get from either a lifetime of worry or a week in this place, maybe both. The man doesn't speak right away. He studies you with a slow blink, as if measuring whether you're worth the effort. Then, with a rasp like dry leaves, he mutters, "New!" You confirm with a nod, not sure if words are the right currency here. From somewhere further down the row, another voice pipes up, a woman's, sharp and clear despite the distance. "Don't talk to him," she says. "He'll sell your story to the jailer for extra bread." The man next to you rolls his eyes, which you take as confirmation that the accusation isn't entirely false. Medieval dungeons could be a mixed bag of humanity. Criminals, debtors, political prisoners, and sometimes just the unlucky who'd fallen afoul of a noble's bad mood. Historians still argue whether prisoners were deliberately grouped for certain purposes, punishment, intimidation, or convenience, or if the jailer simply filled whichever cell was empty. Judging by the voices around you, this place has gathered people from every rung of the social ladder, and then sawed off the ladder entirely. The man by your side leans closer. "Name's Henri," he says. "What did you do?" It's a strange question, asked casually, as if he's inquiring about your favorite soup. You tell him the truth, or at least a version of it. He smirks like he's heard better. A shuffle from the corner draws your attention. In the cell opposite, a figure sits cross-legged on the floor, head bent, muttering to themselves. Their hair is wild, a tangle that might hide eyes if they ever looked up. Henri notices your glance. "That's Jacques," he says quietly. Thinks the crows talk to him. Might be right. One quirky historical tidbit. In some medieval prisons, animals, rats, crows, even cats, were believed to carry messages or omens. Some prisoners courted their attention, thinking it might bring luck or favor from supernatural forces. Whether Jacques truly hears the crows or just prefers their company to people, you decide not to ask. Further along the row, the woman who'd warned you earlier now hums under her breath. The tune is low, meandering, almost like a lullaby. The sound is strange against the background of drips and shuffles, but oddly comforting. Music wasn't unknown in dungeons. Traveling minstrels, political prisoners, or just the musically inclined sometimes sang or tapped rhythms on the bars to pass the time. The jailer's shadow passes briefly across the corridor. Conversation halts. You feel an unspoken tension ripple down the row, a tightening like a rope pulled taut. His footsteps fade, and only then do the murmurs resume, softer than before. Henri stretches out, his back against the wall, feet nearly touching yours through the bars. "You'll get used to the noises," he says, "or you won't. Either way, you'll stop noticing after a while." You're not sure that's comforting, but you file it away as the sort of advice that only makes sense after too many nights down here. Somewhere in the shadows, something small and fast darts past your cell, another rat, or maybe two. They disappear into a gap in the wall, vanishing so smoothly it's like the stone swallowed them. Henri watches them go. "You learn where they live," he says, "and you don't sleep near their doors." The humming from down the row shifts into quiet words you can't quite catch. The rhythm is slow, almost hypnotic. The corridor feels suspended in time, the air thick with stillness. You could almost drift into sleep if it weren't for the occasional cough, scrape, or splash from someone tending to their bucket. Historians still debate the actual day-to-day experience of sharing a medieval dungeon with others. Some sources speak of camaraderie born from shared hardship, Others describe constant theft, mistrust, and occasional violence. Here, with Henri beside you, Jacques muttering across the way, and the nameless woman singing in the distance, you feel like you've stumbled into a strange mix of both. You pull your blanket tighter, the rough wool scraping your neck. Henri settles in, closing his eyes as though nothing more will happen tonight. But you're new, and your ears catch every sound. You wonder how long before you become just another shadow in the row, speaking to the next new in the same tone Henri used with you. For now, though, you sit quietly, letting the sounds and shapes of your cellmates seep into your awareness. You're not sure whether their presence makes the place less lonely or more so. You're not sure what wakes you, if you even slept. But when your eyes open, the darkness feels thicker. The torchlight in the corridor has burned low, leaving only a dull orange glow, barely enough to make out the bars. The rest of the dungeon is a shifting patchwork of shadow, moving just enough to make you question whether you're seeing things. Then you hear it. Drip, drip, drip. At first, it's just water somewhere in the distance. Then a second sound joins, an irregular scrape, like metal on stone. You hold your breath, listening. It stops. Henry is awake too. You can hear his breathing, slower than yours, but not quite steady. Rats, he mutters, or something that wants you to think it's rats. The thing about medieval dungeons is that sound doesn't behave the way you expect. With the low ceilings and twisting halls, noises bend and echo, so you can never tell if they're coming from right next to you or 2 corridors over. Historians still argue whether jailers use this to their advantage, keeping prisoners unnerved and compliant without lifting a finger. In your case, you're starting to believe it works. Somewhere far down the hall, a chain rattles. Not the heavy clink of someone shifting their weight. This is sharper, like a sudden tug. Then, just as quickly, silence again. You shift on the straw, the rustle sounding far too loud in your own ears. That's when you notice the whispering. 2 voices, close together, somewhere in the corridor. The words are too soft to understand, but the tone is urgent. You strain to hear more, and for a moment the pitch rises just enough for you to catch one. Tonight. Quirky fact. There are accounts of prisoners using the cover of night to plan escapes, timing their movements to the jailer's rounds and the dimming of torches. Of course, those same accounts often end with someone being caught before they even reach the gate. The whispering stops abruptly, replaced by another sound, scratching. It's faint, but persistent, like claws or nails on stone. You glance toward the source and see 2 small, gleaming eyes reflecting the dying torchlight. A rat, enormous by your standards, is wedged in a crack near the floor, working at something with quick, deliberate motions. You watch it vanish into the wall with whatever prize it's claimed. The air in the dungeon changes at night. It's not colder exactly, just heavier, like it's settled lower to the ground. Every breath feels closer to the stone, pulling in the smell of damp straw, rusted iron, and the sour tang of bodies that haven't moved much in hours. From the opposite cell, Jacques' muttering grows louder. At first it's random syllables, then distinct words. They're watching, always watching. His voice cracks, then dips back into a low chant. Henri sighs. "Ignore him," he says. "He gets like this when it's quiet, or loud, or anywhere in between." Another drip echoes somewhere above, followed by a faint plunk, in the puddle near your wall. You start to think about what might be in that water. You decide not to think too hard. You close your eyes, trying to block it all out, but the sounds just rearrange themselves in the dark. The shuffling from the cell 2 down, the sudden cough from the woman who sang earlier, the faint squeak of a chain swinging gently in a draft you can't feel. Historians still debate how much of dungeon life was genuine terror, and how much was the prisoner's own mind turning shadows into threats. Lying here, you're not sure it matters. When you can't see more than a few feet, your imagination will happily do the rest. Then, suddenly, there's a loud clang, the unmistakable slam of a distant iron door. The noise rolls down the corridor like a drumbeat, jolting even Henri to sit up. Footsteps follow, slow but heavy, each one sending a faint vibration through the stone beneath you. The torchlight shifts, growing brighter for a moment as the jailer passes, keys swinging from his belt. His eyes sweep the row, pausing briefly on you. Then he's gone, and the darkness folds back in. It's quieter after that. Too quiet. You pull the blanket over your head, as though that thin layer of wool could keep the sounds, or whatever makes them, away. Somewhere in the silence, a single drop falls. When the dungeon wakes, it doesn't wake gently. There's no sunrise here, just the sudden flare of torches and the jailer's voice barking in the corridor. The clang of iron keys against the bars rattles your bones faster than any alarm clock. Henri grumbles beside you, rolling off the straw mat with all the enthusiasm of a man heading to his own execution. "Breakfast," he mutters, though the word is too generous for what's coming. The jailer's assistant, a boy no older than 16, makes his way down the row with a wooden pail in each hand. One smells vaguely of something grain-based, the other just smells old. As he reaches your cell, he sloshes a ladle into the first pail and pours a grayish liquid into a clay bowl. "Don't spill it," he warns, sliding the bowl through the gap at the bottom of the bars. Then he tosses you a hunk of bread so hard it nearly bounces. You take a cautious sip of the liquid, which turns out to be a watery gruel with a texture somewhere between glue and regret. Medieval prison rations were rarely about nourishment. They were about keeping you barely alive enough to face your sentence. Historians still argue whether this was deliberate cruelty or simply the cheapest option available. Henri dips his bread into the gruel to soften it. "Pro tip," he says, "don't look too closely at the chunks. It's better that way." You choose to follow his advice. From 2 cells over, Jacques is already arguing with the boy, demanding fresh bread like a man of my station deserves. The boy responds with a laugh that's far too jaded for someone his age. "You're lucky to get bread at all," he says, and moves on. Quirky fact, some medieval prisons actually allowed wealthier inmates to buy better meals from local taverns, delivered right to their cells, so long as they paid the jailer a cut. Unfortunately, you do not fall into that category. The bread is hard enough to double as a weapon, but after a few mouthfuls, hunger dulls your standards. Still, the smell of mold clings faintly to it. Henri finishes his and licks the last of the gruel from his bowl, with the determination of someone who knows this is all he's getting until dusk. Once the bowls are collected, the corridor settles into the low hum of morning. A prisoner sings softly from somewhere near the back, an old tune about green fields and summer. The melody drifts in and out as others talk quietly or shuffle about their cells. The sound almost makes you forget the damp and the smell. Almost. Then the jailer makes his rounds again, this time checking locks, counting heads, and glancing at the buckets in each cell. Yours is uncomfortably full, which earns you a look somewhere between disgust and boredom. He replaces it with a cleaner one, and moves on. You notice, for the first time, how the dungeon feels in daylight. Not that there's actual daylight, but the torches are brighter, and the air is just a touch less heavy. The rats are still here, though. One scurries along the far wall, pausing to nibble at something unidentifiable. Henri leans against the wall, his voice low. Best get used to it. This is your gourmet dining experience now. Next time, maybe they'll throw in a beetle for protein. He chuckles at his own joke. The worst part is knowing he's not wrong. You try not to think about lunch, or the absence of it. Instead, you watch the boy with the pails make another trip past the cells, this time with a smaller bucket. He sprinkles a pinch of salt into the gruel for one prisoner, skips 3 cells, then adds a slice of dried onion to another's bowl. Henri watches with narrowed eyes. Favorites, he mutters. Always got favorites. The meal may be over, but the taste lingers far too long, and not in a pleasant way. You take a sip from the communal water jug in the corner of the cell. It's not much fresher than the gruel, but it clears your mouth enough to make you think you might survive until the next round. Survive. That's the goal here. One watery breakfast at a time. The hours after breakfast stretch on in a peculiar, endless way, long enough that you start measuring time by drips from the ceiling instead of the rhythm of your own thoughts. In the dungeon, there's no natural sense of day, only the shuffle of boots and the scrape of metal to mark the passing of hours. Henri informs you, with the grim cheer of a veteran inmate, that every dungeon has its routine, though the word feels optimistic. We're livestock with less pasture, he says, scratching at the edge of his straw mat. Soon, the jailer returns with a handful of his assistants. The cell doors creak open one by one, and prisoners are ordered out, though invited might be a more sarcastic term. The air in the corridor is marginally fresher than your cell, but the torch smoke still hangs like a stubborn ghost. The day's first activity is what Henri calls bucket duty. Every cell's waste bucket is emptied into a large, foul-smelling vat that you suspect has existed since the reign of some forgotten king. You're handed yours, and the handle is slick. Best not to think about why. You carry it down the passage with others, each of you trying not to breathe too deeply. Historians still argue whether medieval jailers enforced such chores purely for hygiene or as a way to remind prisoners of their lowly status. Either way, it works. You can't feel dignified with a sloshing bucket of your own misery in your hands. Once the buckets are returned and replaced, the next part of the routine begins. Sweeping the corridors with bundles of reeds tied together into makeshift brooms. The floor is slick, the dust wet and clumpy, and the rats take this as an invitation to scurry closer for the scraps stirred up. Henri swats at one with his broom, missing by inches. Then comes what the jailer calls exercise. In reality, it's just pacing the length of the main corridor under watch, sometimes while shackled to a partner. You're paired with a lanky man named Bernard, whose breath smells faintly of onions and whose main conversational topic is how many bricks are in the far wall. "I've counted them," he tells you, eyes wide. 247 unless one's loose. Quirky fact. Some medieval dungeons actually did have designated exercise spaces, often in the open air, though these were reserved for higher status prisoners. The rest, people like you, were lucky to stretch their legs at all. As you pace, you pass cells that you hadn't seen before. Small, windowless boxes where the prisoners inside barely glance up. One man is tracing something on the wall with a finger. Another simply sits, staring into the middle distance. Bernard leans toward you and whispers, "Long-timers. They don't do the counting anymore?" After the exercise period, you're sent back to your cell. The jailer locks the door with the casual air of someone putting away laundry. Henry collapses onto the mat. "That's it for the morning," he says. "This afternoon, we might get water duty. If you're lucky, you'll carry the clean buckets. If you're not," he gestures toward the waste vat, "well, you already know." You settle onto the mat, too, the straw shifting under you with a faint crunch. The sound of dripping water from somewhere above becomes your background noise again. You wonder what time it is. Bernard would probably have an answer, though it wouldn't involve a clock. Just the number of drips since breakfast. Somewhere down the corridor, a prisoner starts humming. The tune is oddly upbeat, and you catch yourself tapping a finger against your knee. Even in the belly of a medieval dungeon, the human brain looks for rhythm, for pattern, anything to hold on to the sense of being alive. Henri notices and grins. "You'll get used to it," he says. "The boredom's the real punishment. The chores are just the garnish." The afternoon air in the dungeon is thicker than morning air. More heat, more staleness, more weight pressing on your chest. You've barely settled into the monotony when heavy boots scrape toward your cell. This time, it's not the jailer alone. 2 guards in chainmail flank him, each holding a torch, the flames casting long, twitching shadows across the damp stone walls. Henry's grin fades. They're here for someone. His tone is flat, but his eyes follow the guards the way prey watches a predator. The key turns in your lock with a deliberate slowness. "You," the jailer says, pointing his thick finger toward your chest. "Up. Your legs feel heavier than they should, but you rise. The corridor outside is suddenly colder, as if the air here prefers to rush toward freedom whenever the doors open. The guards walk you past a stretch of cells you haven't seen before. These doors are solid wood with tiny barred windows, as if they're hiding something you shouldn't even glimpse. You're led into a chamber that smells faintly of hot iron and old smoke. The walls are hung with tools, pincers, hooks, ropes, and items whose purposes you'd rather not identify. A wooden table sits in the center, its surface gouged with deep scratches. In one corner, a brazier glows red, filling the room with a low, constant heat. Standing beside the table is a man in a dark tunic, his hair cropped short and his expression unreadable. "We're just going to have a little talk," he says, his voice oddly soft. Historians still argue whether medieval interrogations in lesser dungeons were primarily about extracting confessions, gathering intelligence, or simply reinforcing fear. Whatever the case, you suspect little talk is medieval shorthand for brace yourself. The man begins with questions: where you're from, why you're here, who you know. You answer cautiously, aware that anything you say could be twisted into something else. Occasionally, he nods or makes a mark on a scrap of parchment. At one point, he picks up an oddly shaped metal object from the table and turns it in his hands. Curious thing, he muses, not looking at you. They say it was used in Navarre, or maybe Flanders. Nobody agrees. The way he says it makes you wonder if he's testing you or just enjoys the sound of uncertainty. Quirky fact, some medieval questioning rooms were multi-purpose, used not just for interrogations, but also for storing wine or supplies. The thought crosses your mind that this room could have smelled a lot nicer in a different era. The questions grow more pointed, circling back to earlier answers, testing for inconsistencies. Your throat tightens. It's not that you have much to hide, but here the truth feels fragile, like a candle in a draft. Eventually, the man steps back and nods toward the guards. Take them back. He hasn't raised his voice once, and that unnerves you more than shouting would have. The walk to your cell feels longer this time. You notice things you didn't before. A dark stain on the wall that might be rust. A groove worn into the flagstone floor where countless boots have passed. When you're finally locked in again, Henry studies your face. You got off easy, he says. Sometimes they make you sit in there all night, listening to the fire hiss. You lie back on the straw, the phantom heat of the brazier still on your skin. You can't shake the image of the tools on the wall, nor the way the man in the tunic handled them, as if they were simply part of his daily routine, no more remarkable than a baker's rolling pin. From somewhere down the corridor, you hear that same prisoner humming again. This time, the tune feels more like a reminder than a distraction. Keep your head down, keep breathing, and maybe, just maybe, you'll see the morning. You wake to the smell of something you'd hoped was a dream. Stale straw gone sour with mildew, and the faint tang of old meat fat that never quite burned away from the torch brackets. The darkness is a little less complete than before. A dim, hesitant light flickers through the dungeon's corridor, crawling across the stones like it's afraid to be here. The sound that woke you is the dragging shuffle of boots on uneven ground. At first, you think it's another prisoner, but the steps are too steady. Then you hear the faint clink of keys, not the frantic jingle of someone in a hurry, but the lazy, almost arrogant sound of someone who knows no one here will ever outrun them. The jailer appears, his silhouette filling the doorway for a moment before he moves to the center of the corridor. He's carrying something under one arm, a wooden board, darkened by years of use, and in his other hand, a thin rod of iron. The board turns out to be a tray. On it are slices of bread so dry they look fossilized, a hunk of something that might be cheese if you squint, and a clay mug. The mug's contents are a mystery for now, though your stomach already knows it's not wine. Henry stirs beside you, blinking at the sight. Breakfast, he mutters, with the tone of someone describing the weather during a hurricane. The jailer doesn't hand it to you. Instead, he sets the tray down on the floor, just far enough into the cell that you have to shuffle forward on your knees to reach it. The bread crumbles in your hand as soon as you pick it up, the dust clinging to your fingers like fine sand. The cheese, if it is cheese, has a smell sharp enough to sting your nose. And the drink, well, let's say it's water, in the same way a puddle is a lake. Mainstream fact. In many medieval prisons, meals weren't provided regularly by the institution. Prisoners often relied on friends, family, or charitable donations to supplement meager rations. Bread, water, and a scrap of protein were typical, though Protein might mean salted fish, dried beans, or even small rodents in desperate cases. Quirky tidbit. There's a record from 14th century England of a prisoner complaining that his bread was so hard it injured his gums. His complaint was denied on the grounds that soft bread would encourage overindulgence. You imagine a medieval judge nodding gravely, as though protecting the public from dangerous acts of chewing. You try to eat slowly, but the dryness makes it impossible. The bread disintegrates like it's trying to flee your mouth. The cheese leaves an oily coat on your tongue, and the water tastes faintly of tin and something else you can't place. Henry finishes his portion without comment, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Better than nothing, he says. You're not entirely convinced. The jailer lingers, leaning against the wall just outside your cell. His eyes travel over the prisoners in that slow, predatory way, like a cat deciding which bird in the garden would be easiest to catch. You wonder if this is part of the meal, feeding on the sight of you forced into this small, humiliating ritual. He picks his teeth with a sliver of wood. You too, he says, jerking his head toward you and Henry. Work detail later. Chains on. You don't ask what work detail means. It could be hauling buckets of water, scraping moss from the walls, or, if you're unlucky, helping clean the latrines. Henri just nods and mutters something about keeping your head down. Historians still argue whether work assignments in medieval dungeons were genuinely for maintenance or simply another method of control, forcing prisoners to burn energy and reminding them they belong to the institution, body, and time alike. When he leaves, the cell feels heavier somehow. The food sits in your stomach like a lump of regret. You lean back against the wall, wishing you could rinse your mouth, wishing you could rinse your whole life. Really, a scraping noise interrupts your thoughts. A rat nosing along the edge of the straw. It stops to sniff the crumbs you didn't realize had fallen from your lap. You think about shooing it away, but Henri stops you. Let it be. Sometimes they bring news from other cells. You laugh at that, half at the absurdity, half because you suspect he's only half joking. In this place, even rats have their routines. Hours pass, though hours is a guess. The light in the corridor dims and brightens in patterns you can't quite predict. Your stomach rumbles again far sooner than you think it should, but you know better than to hope for another tray any time soon. When the boots return, they're louder, paired with the metallic jangle of actual chains. The jailer comes with 2 sets of iron manacles, each connected to a short length of chain. They're heavy, and when he locks them around your wrists, the cold bites deeper than the metal should. Henri gets his own pair, and you're marched out into the corridor. The air outside the cell is somehow worse, warmer, thicker, tinged with a smell like burnt wool. You pass other cells, catching glimpses of faces that vanish the moment you look their way. Some are standing, some lying down, some just staring into nothing. Your destination turns out to be a corner of the dungeon where a shallow trough runs along the wall. Buckets stand nearby, filled with murky water. You're handed a stiff brush and told to scrub the stones. The work is mindless, but your wrists ache from the manacles and the angle forces you to hunch low, your back screaming within minutes. Henri hums as he works, not a cheerful tune, but something slow and circular, like a song that doesn't know how to end. Keeps me from thinking, he says. You decide to try it. The humming doesn't help much, but it's better than listening to the occasional distant sound of someone shouting in pain. By the time the jailer calls an end to the task, your arms feel like lead and your knees are damp from the wet stone. You shuffle back to your cell, each step dragging a little more than the last. The jailer locks you in without a word. You collapse onto the straw, the smell of the damp corridor still clinging to you. You think about the bread, the cheese, the water, how little it took to make you hope, and how quickly that hope evaporated. Sleep comes slowly, but when it does, it's deep enough that you don't notice the rat returning to sniff at your sleeve, as if checking whether you're still part of this strange, closed world. You wake to a sensation that isn't sight or sound, but scent. So thick and immediate, it feels like you're being smothered from the inside out. The dungeon has many layers of smell, and this morning, they've decided to gang up on you. The first layer is the stale, wet musk of the straw, which clings to you like a second skin. Even when you shift and find a patch that feels drier, the smell doesn't change. The second layer is the stone itself, cold, damp, and somehow sour. You'd never thought of rocks as having a taste in the air, but here they do, and it's unpleasant. Then comes the rot. It drifts in from somewhere beyond the corridor, riding the faint current of air like an unwanted guest. You can't tell if it's food gone bad, an animal that wandered in and didn't wander out, or something worse. Henri notices it too. He doesn't speak, but he makes a face you've seen before. The look of a man who's smelled this before and is trying to remember where it leads. Mainstream fact. Medieval dungeons were notorious for their stench, not simply because of poor sanitation, but because of how they were built. Many were located underground, below kitchens, stables, or cesspits, allowing waste and its smell to seep through cracks in the stone. Ventilation was minimal, so smells didn't just linger. They layered week after week. Quirky tidbit. In the tower of London's Salt Tower, one 16th century prisoner wrote in the margins of a smuggled Bible, "The air tastes of the river." Historians believe he meant the Thames at low tide, when its waters reeked of sewage and dead fish. Today, the jailer arrives early. No tray of bread and cheese this time, just the clatter of his keys and the scrape of your cell door. "Up," he says, his voice low and without patience. You and Henri stand, though your bodies protest the sudden movement. He leads you not toward the work corner, but down a narrow passage you haven't seen before. It's darker here, the torches spaced farther apart, their light revealing slick patches on the floor that you avoid without thinking. The smell grows sharper with each step. When you reach the source, you almost wish you hadn't. It's a pit, square and stone-lined, with a dark liquid surface broken occasionally by the sluggish movement of something just below. You don't need to ask what it is. The jailer gestures with his chin to a small pile of wooden buckets and a rope pulley system. You'll haul it, then scrub. Henri groans quietly, but not from surprise, more from recognition. "Night soil," he says under his breath. "Waste from the whole place, sometimes from above, too." He doesn't elaborate on what above means. You step forward and take the first bucket. The rope creaks, the bucket sinks, and the smell punches you full in the face. Your stomach lurches, but you force yourself to keep going. The liquid sloshes as you lift it, heavier than it looks. It's your job to carry it down another short corridor and dump it into an outdoor trench. a space walled with high stone to keep the waste from seeping into the walking paths. Mainstream fact: removing waste from medieval prisons was often assigned to prisoners themselves, both as punishment and necessity. In some castles, this was done only once every few days, meaning the accumulation could be dangerous to health. Records show outbreaks of dysentery, typhoid, and jail fever, likely typhus, spreading rapidly in such conditions. Quirky tidbit: some jailers sold the waste to farmers as fertilizer, pocketing the profit. The prisoners who hauled it rarely saw any benefit, except maybe the brief moments of fresh air outside the walls. When it's your turn to scrub, the brush feels inadequate against the sticky residue coating the pit's edges. You work methodically, trying not to think about what's soaking into your skin, though you know the smell will follow you for days. Henri works beside you in silence, but his face is tight, as if each breath costs him something. A rat skitters across the far side of the pit, pauses to sniff, then disappears into a crack in the wall. The jailer notices. "Don't waste your time chasing them. They live here better than you do," he says with a smirk. When the job's done, you're allowed to rinse your hands in a shallow basin of water that's only slightly cleaner than what you've been hauling. The cold bites into your fingers, but it does little for the smell. Back in your cell, you sit down heavily. The straw still smells bad, but compared to the pit, it's almost a relief. Henry produces a scrap of cloth from his sleeve, thin and frayed, but faintly scented with something herbal. He presses it to his nose and closes his eyes. "Time," he says, "from before." You don't ask what before means. The rest of the day is a battle between your mind and your senses. Every whiff of the air seems to bring the pit back to you. Even when you try to focus on something else, the scrape of boots in the hall, the faint drip of water, you catch yourself wrinkling your nose as though that might filter the air. When you finally lie down, you understand the cruelty of smells. You can close your eyes to the dark. You can block your ears with your hands, but you can't stop breathing. In this place, even the air is part of the sentence. The sound reaches you before the sight. An irregular dripping, sometimes a splash, always echoing faintly through the stone like a slow heartbeat. You've heard it before, but tonight it's closer, sharper. Henri stirs in the darkness, tilts his head and mutters, "It's come again." You don't have time to ask what it is, because the jailer appears, keys jangling, torchlight slashing through the cell. "Up," he says, the word flat and impatient. You've learned that in this place. Asking why is a waste of breath. The corridor he leads you down is one you haven't taken before, narrower than the others, with the walls slick to the touch. The air here is different, heavier, almost like stepping into a bathhouse with no heat. The dripping grows louder. When you round the corner, you see it, a section of the passage flooded from wall to wall. The water is dark and opaque, reflecting the torchlight in thin, quivering lines. It's impossible to tell how deep it goes from where you stand, but your boots are already sinking into the edge of it, and cold seeps into your toes. Mainstream fact: many medieval dungeons were prone to flooding, especially those built below ground level or near rivers. Seasonal rains, high tides, or even poor drainage could cause water to seep in, sometimes rising several feet. In London's infamous Newgate prison, there were accounts of prisoners standing in ankle-deep water for weeks. Quirky tidbit. In some places, jailers used flooding deliberately as a form of soft torture. Prisoners would be moved to the low cells during rainy seasons, the constant damp and cold breaking their will faster than the lash ever could. Your task is obvious when the jailer gestures toward a stack of wooden buckets and a half-rotted length of rope. "Bail it out," he says, "or it'll reach the storerooms." The irony doesn't escape you. You spent yesterday hauling waste into an outdoor trench, and now you're hauling water out of an indoor trench. The first bucket you dip is heavier than you expect, the cold cutting up through your arms as the water sloshes against the sides. It smells faintly metallic, like old coins, and the taste of that smell settles in the back of your throat. Henri works beside you, slow but steady. The buckets have to be carried up a short set of steps to a drain that runs toward the outer courtyard. The trip is slippery. Each step feels like it's daring you to fall. The jailer, of course, doesn't help. He leans against the wall, chewing on something and watching you like a man inspecting livestock. Halfway through, you notice the walls weeping, thin rivulets running down from cracks high above, adding fresh water faster than you can carry it out. Henry mutters, "We're not winning this." He's right. Mainstream fact. Drainage in medieval structures often relied on gravity alone, meaning that once water got into the lowest chambers, it could take days or weeks to clear. Some castles built in marshy areas like Pevensey and Sussex had permanent water in certain sections, and prisoners there adapted by building makeshift platforms from whatever debris they could find. Quirky tidbit. In 15th century Germany, one jailer reportedly kept eels in the flooded sections of his dungeon. He claimed it kept the water fresh by preventing stagnation, though prisoners swore the eels were more interested in nibbling on toes than cleaning. After hours of work, your back aches and your hands are raw from the rope handle of the bucket. The waterline has dropped only a little, but the jailer finally calls it enough for now. You can tell by the way he says it that the flooding will be back, probably tomorrow. On the way back to your cell, your wet boots squelch with every step. The cold has crawled up your legs and settled into your hips, and even after you sit, it doesn't leave. Henry pulls off one boot and wrings out his sock, the water dark as ink. "If you sleep like this," he says, "you'll wake coughing, or not wake at all." Historians still argue whether the constant damp of such dungeons was more deadly than the confinement itself. Illnesses like pneumonia, rheumatism, and trench foot were common, and once fever set in, medieval medicine had little to offer. You try to wring your socks as Henri did, but there's no dry place to put them afterward. You end up hanging them on a bit of protruding iron in the wall, knowing they'll still be damp in the morning. When you lie down, the straw squishes faintly under your weight, still holding yesterday's moisture from the waste hauling, now joined by today's flood. The smells mingle into something uniquely foul, but you're too tired to care. You close your eyes and listen to the drip, drip, drip that never really stopped, knowing it will follow you into your dreams. You don't see them at first. You hear them. A faint skittering, then a wet chewing sound. It's coming from the far corner of the cell, where the straw is bunched in a mound you don't remember forming. When you shift toward it, the mound shivers. Two glossy black eyes blink in the torchlight, and then another, set, and another. The straw ripples as a whole colony of rats stirs, their bodies weaving through the bedding like some living rope. Henry groans. "It's their court tonight," he says, "and you wish you'd misheard." The jailer confirms it without even a glance inside. "Keep your toes covered," he says flatly, and slams the cell door. The smell hits next. Rancid grain, wet fur, and the sharp ammonia of rodent droppings. You pull your knees to your chest, but the rats aren't deterred. They're bolder than the street ones you've seen. Prison has made them fearless. Mainstream fact, rats thrived in medieval dungeons not just because of filth, but because they could move freely between cells through cracks, drains, and even gaps in wooden doors. Chronic infestations were recorded in places like the Tower of London, where guards often ignored them unless they damaged supplies. Quirky tidbit. In some prison folklore, rats were seen as judges. If they swarmed a prisoner, it was a sign of guilt. If they ignored you, you were supposedly innocent. Of course, the rats weren't actually judging. They were just hungry. One bold one climbs onto Henri's foot. He jerks, sending it squealing into the straw, but that only riles the others. They pour out of the corner in a loose wave, sniffing, twitching, their tails curling over the stone like pale worms. You remember the jailer's warning and shove your feet deeper under your thin blanket. The biggest rat, its fur patchy, one ear chewed to a nub, seems to lead the rest. It waddles to the center of the cell, stands on its hind legs, and sniffs the air like a herald calling court to order. The others cluster around it, noses quivering. Mainstream fact. Medieval records mention rat-proofing attempts like setting traps baited with rancid meat. But in prison conditions, these rarely worked. In fact, some jailers refused to kill rats because they helped dispose of organic waste, sometimes including the bodies of prisoners who died in their cells. Quirky tidbit. In 17th century France, an executioner reportedly kept a trained rat that would steal bread from new prisoners' belongings and bring it to him in exchange for bits of dried apple. No one knew how he trained it, but the story spread, and executioner's rat became slang for a petty thief. You and Henry sit perfectly still, barely breathing. The rats don't scatter when you move slowly. Sudden gestures are what set them off. Henry whispers, "They're looking for crumbs." You pat your tunic pockets, praying you don't have anything edible. You don't, but that doesn't stop the leader from waddling toward you. Its whiskers brush your ankle, and the sensation makes your skin crawl. It pauses, sniffing, then moves toward the small iron cup of water by your bedding. It tips the cup over, spilling the water, and licks the puddle. The others follow, jostling, their tiny claws clicking on the stone. Historians still argue whether rats in prisons posed a greater threat as disease carriers or as direct hazards. Bubonic plague spread by fleas on rats is well known, but constant bites and scratches in filthy conditions could easily lead to deadly infections like sepsis. The court lasts for nearly an hour. They chew on the straw, on bits of your worn blanket, even on the leather strap of Henri's boot. One of them tries to drag the boot away, and Henri has to yank it back, muttering curses under his breath. Eventually, a sharp whistle echoes from somewhere down the corridor. The rats freeze, ears twitching, and then retreat as quickly as they came, vanishing into cracks and gaps you can't even see until they move. The leader is the last to go, casting one last look over its shoulder as if memorizing your faces for later. When the cell is quiet again, you realize your breathing is ragged. Henri shakes his head. You'll get used to them, he says. You're not sure you believe him. You wipe the spilled water with the driest bit of your blanket, but the damp soaks through instantly. The faint warmth from your body makes the smell rise again. Wet wool, old urine, and that lingering musk of rat fur. In the dark, you can still hear them somewhere beyond the wall, scratching and squeaking, like the court is still in session, just out of sight. Sleep isn't something you fall into here. It's something you're dragged toward, like a prisoner being hauled to court. You curl up on the damp blanket, thinking maybe exhaustion will numb the chill. But then the chains come into play. They're not decorative. 2 iron cuffs are fixed around your ankles, connected by a short length of chain. It's long enough to shuffle, but not enough to stretch your legs fully. Tonight, Henri insists you keep them on while you sleep, or the jailer will do worse tomorrow. You don't ask what worse means. The metal digs into your skin when you turn. You try lying on your side, but the chain twists, forcing your knees together until the ache becomes unbearable. On your back, the cuffs bite into your ankles. There's no position that works, so you settle for the one that hurts least and hope fatigue will do the rest. Mainstream fact: shackles were standard in many medieval prisons, not just for dangerous prisoners, but for anyone deemed a flight risk, which could be almost anyone. Records from England's Newgate prison describe inmates chained at night lest they rise in sleep and flee. Quirky tidbit: in some dungeons, the shackles were custom fitted to a prisoner's legs, supposedly to prevent escapes. But there are stories of prisoners greasing their ankles with candle tallow and wriggling free. One famous escapee, Eustace Dogger, reportedly slipped his chains this way, though historians still argue whether the tale is fact or romantic embellishment. The sound of the chain is constant, a faint clink when you twitch, a dragging rattle when you shift more than an inch. Henri has learned to ignore it, but you find yourself hyper-aware of every tiny movement. You wonder if, in a few days, you'll hear phantom clinks even when you're free. You close your eyes, but the cell's noises keep the darkness restless. Water dripping somewhere beyond the wall, the scurrying of those rats returning to their hidden channels, and the slow, rasping breath of Henri beside you. Somewhere above, boots clomp across floorboards, followed by the muffled thud of a door. Just when sleep begins to nibble at your edges, your foot jerks involuntarily. The chain slaps against the stone, and Henri stirs. "Stop dreaming about running," he mutters not unkindly. Historians still argue whether shackles were primarily a security measure or a form of punishment in themselves. While many point to the practical purpose of preventing escapes, others suggest the constant discomfort was intended to break the prisoner's spirit, making them more compliant during interrogation or trial. You try to breathe slower, hoping to trick your body into relaxation. The air tastes metallic, as if the iron in the chains is leaching into it. Your mind wanders to strange places. What if you wake up one morning and your legs have simply forgotten how to walk without restraint? The cell is pitch dark now. The torch in the corridor has burned out, leaving only the faint glow of moonlight leaking through a high barred slit in the wall. You can't reach it, but you watch the silver light shift as clouds pass. Somewhere in that gray haze between waking and sleep, you begin to dream. At first, you're outside, in a meadow, the chain gone, the grass cool under your bare feet. But as you run, The earth turns to stone beneath you, the meadow shrinking into narrow corridors. The grass blades twist into iron links, snaking up your ankles. You jolt awake to find your legs tangled in the real chain, the cuffs biting deeper where you've shifted in your sleep. Henri is snoring softly, his own restraint silent. You envy his stillness, the way he seems to have surrendered to it. Mainstream fact. In some cases, shackles were attached to heavy iron balls or even fixed to the floor by a staple, further reducing movement. The practice was so common that ball and chain became an enduring metaphor for restraint. Quirky tidbit. A few prisoners decorated their shackles with charms or carvings, believing it would bring luck or ward off injury. Archaeologists have found cuffs etched with crude stars, crosses, and even stick figure animals. Whether these were acts of defiance or desperation is still debated. You run your fingers along the cold metal, feeling for any imperfection, any notch that could be worked wider. There's nothing. Whoever forged these knew their trade. You imagine the blacksmith hammering iron while knowing exactly what it would do to a human body. At some point, you drift again. Your last thought before sleep claims you is that maybe Henri's right. Maybe the trick isn't to fight the chain, but to pretend it isn't there at all. But even as that thought forms, you feel its weight, the cold bite on your skin, reminding you otherwise. You wake to a noise that doesn't belong to dreams, a steady plink, like a metronome marking out the seconds. At first, you think it's in your head, some leftover rhythm from the night's chains. But then a droplet lands squarely on your forehead, cold enough to make you gasp. The ceiling above is barely visible in the dim moonlight, but you can make out the uneven stones and right at the center, a black spot glistening. Another droplet swells and falls, hitting the exact same spot between your eyes. Henri groans and rolls away from the sound. "It's the leak," he mutters. "Ignore it." Ignore it? You've heard about this. Stories from travelers, half dismissed as myth, how Chinese water torture supposedly involved a drip hitting the same spot on the victim's skin over and over till their mind began to unravel. Mainstream fact. Historians agree this drip torture was rarely, if ever, a formal execution method in medieval Europe. But similar conditions were accidentally, or perhaps intentionally, created in dungeons with poorly maintained ceilings. You shift along the wall trying to dodge the next drop, but your chain clinks and stops you short. The water plinks onto the stone now, each impact echoing far louder than it should. The cell is otherwise quiet, too quiet, so the sound expands until it feels like the whole room is vibrating in time with it. Quirky tidbit. Medieval prisoners sometimes gave nicknames to the drips that haunted their cells, as if naming them gave some control. One 14th century French inmate called his Jacques, claiming they held conversations during the long nights. You're not quite at that point yet, but give it another few hours. Historians still argue whether such leaks were simply a sign of neglect or deliberately left unrepaired to torment inmates. After all, fixing a hole in the ceiling wasn't exactly beyond the skill set of a castle's mason. The water is icy, straight from rain, seeping through the castle's upper stones. You press your tongue to the next drop, tasting minerals, maybe even soot from the chimneys above. It's not unpleasant, but the rhythm is maddening. Plink, plink, plink. You start unconsciously holding your breath, waiting for the next hit. Henri snores again, proof that he's long past caring. You envy his ability to sleep through it, but he's been here for months. Maybe the brain learns to file the sound under background. You're not there yet. You think about the prisoners who didn't survive this kind of drip. Not from drowning, obviously, but from the slow erosion of sanity. You picture yourself weeks from now, eyes wide, counting each drop aloud until the jailer finally opens the door, not to free you, but to haul away someone who stopped speaking in full sentences. The irony hits you. You'd welcome rain if you were outside right now, fresh, cleansing, even joyful. But here, it's just the dungeon's cruel joke. A weather system that chooses only one victim at a time. You try stuffing a scrap of blanket into the spot where the water hits, but the droplet simply runs down the fabric and lands somewhere else on your face. You try shifting again, but the shackled chain is merciless. Eventually, you find a position where the drop hits the stone between your knees instead. It's better, but now you can see it splatter every time, each one sending up a tiny crown of water before disappearing into the floor. Your mind drifts into strange patterns. You count the seconds between drops, trying to find order, but the leak isn't perfectly regular. Sometimes 2 drops fall in quick succession. Sometimes there's a long pause. The unpredictability keeps you on edge. Mainstream fact: in damp medieval prisons, standing water wasn't just an irritation, it was a breeding ground for disease. Chronic dampness could cause trench foot-like symptoms, and the constant drip meant your clothes and bedding never truly dried. Quirky tidbit: some prisoners use constant drips to mark time, claiming they could estimate an hour by counting a set number of drops. Whether that was accurate or just a coping mechanism is still debated. You try it yourself, whispering numbers in the darkness. Henri groans and tells you to shut up, but you keep going until you lose track around 74. Somewhere in that monotony, the sound begins to blur, becoming less of a plink and more of a soft heartbeat in the walls. The next thing you know, you've dozed off sitting up. You wake with your head against the wall, the water still falling in its lazy rhythm, but now it's hitting the cuff on your ankle instead of your forehead. The sound is sharper here, a metallic ting instead of a splash. Somehow, that's worse. Henry's still asleep. The moonlight has shifted, meaning hours have passed. You wonder if the drip will still be here tomorrow night, and the night after that. You close your eyes and imagine the sound fading, replaced by the gentle patter of rain on a roof you actually want to be under. But the cell has no roof in that sense. Only stone, darkness, and this one tiny leak with the patience of centuries. The door creaks open before dawn, spilling a stripe of lantern light across the floor. You flinch, not because of the brightness, but because sudden footsteps mean change, and in here, change is rarely good. The jailer shuffles in, keys jangling at his side. He's older than you first thought, with a beard like tangled rope and eyes that never quite meet yours. He carries a small wooden tray. On it, a heel of bread, a lump of something you hope is cheese, and a clay cup of water. He sets it down just out of your reach and squats to your level. You want it? His voice is gravelly, like the walls have been eroding in his throat for decades. You nod. Then we talk. Mainstream fact: In medieval prisons, the jailer's official wage was often supplemented, sometimes entirely replaced, by fees from inmates. Food, water, even straw for bedding could require payment, either in coin, favors, or information. The prison was less a state-funded facility and more a personal business venture. The jailer leans closer. "Names," he says. "Friends of yours. Ones that might pay for your comfort." His breath is sour, like he's been living off the same bread and cheese he's offering you. Henry stirs beside you, but doesn't open his eyes, wise enough to stay out of this. You feel your stomach twist. You don't have coin, and your friends are not the type who'd pay for anyone's comfort, least of all yours. You shake your head. He shrugs, moves to leave, and you panic. "Wait," your voice cracks. "What if I work for it?" That earns a pause. He glances back, the lantern light catching in his pupils. Work? Quirky tidbit. Some prisoners in debt or without resources struck deals with their jailers, performing small tasks in exchange for privileges. This could be anything from cleaning latrines to carrying messages, though messages often meant coded bribes or threats between rival factions. "You suggest cleaning." The jailer chuckles, a low, unpleasant sound. "The rats already do that. No, maybe you carry something for me." Your mind races. Carry what? To whom? He doesn't say. Instead, he slides the tray within reach and stands. "Eat. Think. I'll be back." The door shuts again, and you're left staring at the bread as if it's a relic from a better world. Henry finally opens his eyes. "Careful," he murmurs. "You carry for him, you carry for everyone, and then you're a piece on their board." Historians still argue whether these prison arrangements were tolerated by higher authorities as a necessary evil, or were a sign of total corruption. Either way, they existed, and for some inmates, they were the only reason they survived long enough to see daylight again. You tear the bread slowly, savoring each bite. The cheese is hard and bitter, but it's food. The water is warm from the jailer's hand, but it washes away the dryness in your throat. Your thoughts keep circling back to the offer, or was it a threat? The jailer didn't say when he'd be back, and that uncertainty gnaws at you more than hunger ever did. Later, footsteps return. The door opens just enough for a folded scrap of parchment to slide across the floor. No words from the jailer, just a nod toward it. You pick it up. There's a crude drawing of a key on one side, and on the other, a single word you recognize as the name of a merchant in town. You don't know what you're supposed to do with it, but Henry's face says enough. Don't get involved. His tone is flat, but his eyes flick to the wall as if listening for someone. That night, you lie awake, the parchment hidden under your thin bedding. The drip from the ceiling is gone, mercifully, but now there's the weight of something else. You can't decide if it's an opportunity or a trap. Mainstream fact. Merchants often acted as intermediaries in illicit trades, even in dealings involving prisoners. Gold, favors, and influence could move in surprising ways when funneled through someone who also sold grain or cloth in the market. You wonder if the merchant is a friend, an enemy, or just another player in a game you barely understand. When the jailer comes again, he doesn't bring food, just stands in the doorway and says, "Tomorrow," and then he's gone. You close your eyes, trying to prepare yourself for whatever tomorrow means here. You suspect that in this place, Survival isn't just about withstanding damp walls, bad food, or even torture. It's about knowing when to play along and when to walk away. The bread sits in your stomach like a stone. If you still haven't fallen asleep, don't worry. We'll be right here with you tonight. Let's move on to our second story together. You wake to the faintest light seeping through the high barred slit of a dungeon window. But not the same dungeon as before. This one is colder, damper, and strangely quieter. Your mind catches up to the fact that somehow you survived the last 24 hours. Every aching muscle is a reminder of it. But before you can savor that small victory, reality presses in. You're now facing another 24 hours, and the dungeon doesn't play favorites. Your straw bed feels slightly less like a bed and more like the shed skin of some giant rat. Brittle, scratchy, and faintly smelling of mildew. The water dripping from the stone ceiling above hits the same spot on your temple over and over, like it's trying to burrow into your skull. You shift to escape it, but your chains rattle in protest, pulling you back into the cold embrace of the wall. The guard who brought you that mysterious gray porridge yesterday shuffles by, glancing in just long enough to make sure you're still breathing. He doesn't speak. Maybe he can't. Maybe he's just decided you're not worth words. Historians still argue whether medieval dungeon guards were more like sadistic overseers or bored civil servants just doing a job. Either way, you're getting the civil servant variety tonight. The air smells faintly of iron. The unmistakable tang of rust mixed with the metallic scent of blood that clings to these stones. Somewhere far down the corridor, a door groans shut, and you hear the thud of a wooden beam sliding into place. It's the kind of sound that reminds you the outside world might as well be on another planet. A rat scurries into view, pausing to examine you with the confident curiosity of a landlord inspecting a tenant. It doesn't fear you. You're slow, chained, predictable. In a strange way, you envy it. In medieval times, rats thrived in places like this. They weren't just pests. They were part of the ecosystem, feeding on scraps and sometimes delivering little surprises to prisoners. Scraps of food swiped from the kitchens or fleas carrying something far deadlier. You probably don't want to think too hard about that last part. Somewhere deep inside you, a part of your mind starts planning. Not escape, you're no fool, but survival. You remember something you overheard from a fellow prisoner yesterday? The second day is worse because they know you're not dead yet. You wonder what exactly he meant. A faint sliver of warmth arrives in the form of sunlight, finally creeping across the stones to your corner. You close your eyes, imagining you're outside, maybe leaning against a wooden fence in a quiet meadow. But the moment is broken by the clank of the guard's keys. He's back, this time with a bucket of water, clear, cold, and shockingly clean. You drink greedily, letting it wash away the sour taste in your mouth. In the Middle Ages, clean water was a luxury. Prisoners often drank whatever they were given, even if it looked suspicious. The guard leaves without a word, but you notice a small loaf of bread tucked under the bucket's handle. It's coarse, dense, and harder than your pillow, but to you, it's a feast. Bread in this era was sometimes mixed with ground beans or peas to make it stretch further, which gave it an odd, earthy taste. You take a cautious bite and nearly crack a tooth. Your thoughts wander, not to freedom, but to pacing yourself. You can't eat it all at once. even though your stomach growls like an angry dog. You break the loaf in half, hiding one piece under the straw. The rat sees you do it. You can only hope it's polite enough to wait. The rest of the day stretches ahead like an endless corridor. You focus on small things, the way the light changes in your cell, the rhythm of the dripping water, the occasional muffled shouts from somewhere beyond. People think surviving a medieval dungeon is all about strength. But really, it's about learning how to live inside your own head without letting it eat you alive. And yet, a tiny, defiant part of you takes comfort in the fact you made it this far. Maybe the next 24 hours won't break you, or maybe they will. But for now, you lean back against the wall, eyes half closed, listening to the slow heartbeat of the dungeon. The world outside may have forgotten you, but you are still here. When the cell door finally creaks open, the light that floods in isn't warm. It's sharp, like a blade pressed to your eyes. 2 guards step in, each gripping your arms before you can even ask what's happening. The cold iron manacles are gone now, replaced by a thick rope biting into your wrists. They drag you down the corridor, the smell of damp stone giving way to something fresher, but also harsher. The air outside carries the scent of mud, livestock, and wood smoke, and you realize with a strange jolt that you haven't breathed open air since the ordeal began. You expect relief. Instead, you feel exposed. The sky above you too wide, the world too bright, like you've been scooped out of darkness and dumped into another kind of danger. You're being taken through the village, not past it, through it. Every footstep on the muddy road feels like a drumbeat announcing your presence. The first faces you see are children's, wide-eyed, half curious, half afraid. Then the adults appear, leaning out of doorways, pausing from work. Some mutter to each other, others just stare. It's the look people give when they're not sure whether they're seeing a survivor or a warning. In medieval times, someone who came back from imprisonment wasn't always greeted as a hero. Sometimes they were suspected of witchcraft, treachery, or making some deal with the enemy. You're suddenly aware that surviving your first 24 hours may have raised more questions than it answered. A woman spits on the ground as you pass. It's not aimed exactly at you, but it's close enough to sting. A man with a butcher's apron folds his arms, eyes following you until you're well past his stall. Somewhere to your right, a chicken flaps wildly, breaking the tense silence for just a second before the stares return. One of the guards leans in, his breath smelling faintly of onions and ale. "Don't speak unless spoken to," he mutters, not unkindly, more like advice than a threat. You file it away. The path leads you into the heart of the village, where the marketplace sprawls around a stone well. Stalls are loaded with goods, rough wool tunics, baskets of apples, slabs of salted meat. The smells are overwhelming, smoke from cooking fires, the sour tang of fermented cabbage, and something sweet you can't quite place. It's there, in the middle of the market, that you feel the full weight of public suspicion. People stop what they're doing. A man sharpening a blade pauses mid-swipe. A pair of merchants arguing over a bolt of fabric goes silent. Every gaze lands on you like a stone in your pocket. You remember a fact you once heard. In some medieval towns, returning prisoners were paraded publicly to prove they were still alive, but also to let the community decide whether they could be trusted again. This feels exactly like that. Then a voice cuts through the quiet. What did you give them? It's an old man, hunched over, leaning on a stick. His eyes are sharp, too sharp for his age. You don't answer, remembering the guard's advice. He grunts, as if your silence is answer enough. A few people follow as the guards lead you onward, murmuring to each other. You catch snippets. Must have told them something. No one comes back without owing. Maybe the devil's mark. The road narrows again, leading you out of the marketplace and toward a larger building at the far end of the village. It's not a church, though it has the height of one. Its walls are thick timber, its doors reinforced with black iron bands. The guards pause at the threshold, giving you a moment to catch your breath. That's when you realize the building is the Lord's Hall, the center of judgment, power, and, if you're unlucky, punishment. As you step inside, the air changes. It's warmer, drier, and carries the faint scent of beeswax. From the candles burning in sconces along the walls, the hall is crowded, not just with guards and servants, but with villagers who have followed to see what will happen next. The Lord sits at the far end on a raised wooden dais, flanked by two men in fine cloaks. His gaze is steady, unreadable. You're pushed forward until you stand at the foot of the dais. The rope around your wrists is untied, but you make no move to rub them. Better to keep your hands visible and harmless. Still alive, the Lord says, not as a greeting, but as an observation. You nod. The room feels smaller now, the air thicker. You realize that the next word spoken in this hall could shape the next 24 hours. Maybe the rest of your life. Somewhere behind you, someone coughs. You wonder if it's the old man from the market. You wonder if anyone here truly wants you to survive another day. And that's when it hits you. Surviving the dungeon was just the first test. Surviving them might be the second. The Lord doesn't speak for a long moment. He just studies you, his head tilted slightly, as though measuring your worth by the way you breathe. Then, with a flick of his fingers, he gestures to a servant. Feed them, he says. It sounds generous. It isn't. In the medieval world, being fed after captivity could mean one of two things. They were giving you strength because you were about to be put to work, or because they wanted to see if you could be trusted with what you were given. And sometimes the food itself was the test. The servant, a wiry man with a shaved head, motions for you to follow him. He leads you through a side door into a smaller chamber. The smell hits you first. Roasted meat, warm bread, a hint of herbs. It's intoxicating after so long without a real meal. On the table sits a trencher of bread, a slice of cold roasted chicken, a wedge of cheese, and a wooden cup of ale. It looks like a feast compared to the thin gruel you've been given before. The servant says nothing. He just stands in the corner, watching. His eyes don't blink much. Your stomach growls, loud enough to echo in the small room. You sit, but your hands hesitate above the food. In medieval courts, poisoning wasn't the stuff of whispered fantasy. It was a calculated political tool. Herbs, mushrooms, or metals like arsenic could be mixed into food or drink without leaving an obvious trace. You remember hearing once that some nobles employed tasters, people who would take a bite first to prove the meal was safe. You have no such luxury here. The bread smells fresh, the chicken well seasoned. The ale has a faint froth. No obvious danger. But then, Poison rarely announces itself. The servant's stare doesn't waver. You pick up the bread first, breaking off a piece. You chew slowly, focusing on every sensation, texture, taste, warmth. Nothing unusual. The chicken is harder to approach. You take a bite. The herbs are strong, maybe thyme and sage. Your mind races. Was that bitterness part of the seasoning, or something else entirely? The ale is the greatest gamble. You lift the cup, the wood rough against your fingers, the liquid is cool, faintly sweet, with a hint of yeast. Again, nothing strange. Yet, the servant finally speaks. You eat like someone expecting the meal to fight back. His voice is calm, almost amused. You swallow, watching his expression. Experience, you say. He nods, not pressing further. When you've eaten enough to dull the edge of hunger, he takes the trencher away. Come, he says. They're waiting. The walk back to the hall feels different now. You're more aware of the warmth in your stomach, the slight heaviness in your limbs. Is it just the comfort of food after so long, or the slow creep of something more sinister? The Lord is still on his dais when you return, though now he's speaking quietly with the two cloaked advisers beside him. One is tall and thin, with a face like a hawk. The other is shorter, broad-shouldered, with a heavy ring on his finger that catches the candlelight. They stop talking as you approach. Strong enough to stand? The Lord asks. Yes, you answer. Good, then you will answer our questions. The next hour is a blur of interrogation. They ask where you were taken, what you saw, who you spoke to. They circle back to the same points, testing your answers for cracks. You give them as much truth as you dare, holding back details that could hurt you or others. Every so often, you catch the hawk-faced man glancing at you in a way that feels measuring. The broad-shouldered one writes something on a small parchment every time you hesitate. By the end, your throat is dry, your pulse uneven. The Lord leans back, studying you once more. You will remain under guard, he says finally, for your safety and ours. The guards step forward, but instead of dragging you back to a cell, they lead you to a small chamber above the hall. It has a narrow bed, a wooden stool, and a single window that looks out over the village. The door is locked from the outside. You sit on the bed, hands resting on your knees. Outside, the market has thinned. The sun is higher now, but there's a chill in the air that seeps through the stone. Your stomach churns slightly. It could be the stress, or the chicken. You can't tell. Somewhere below, a bell tolls, deep and slow. It's not the church bell. It's heavier, meant to call the village together. You realize the day isn't done testing you. If the first 24 hours taught you to survive darkness, maybe the next 24 will teach you how to survive being seen. The bell's toll echoes off the stone walls, heavy and deliberate, each strike a hammer on your nerves. You've heard it before, but never from inside the castle. Out there in the village, it's a call to gather for announcements, trials, punishments. Inside, it's something more pointed. It means the Lord is about to speak, and everyone who matters will be watching. The guard unlocks your door without knocking. He's a tall man with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw, the kind of mark that suggests surviving things most people never see. Up, he says simply. His tone isn't cruel, just final. You stand. The room feels colder the moment you leave it. as if you're stepping not into the castle, but into the mouth of something alive. The corridors twist, lit by narrow windows that let in strips of pale daylight. The air smells faintly of damp stone and burning pitch from the torches in their iron brackets. You pass servants in simple linen tunics, their heads bowed. None make eye contact. Some glance at you sideways, curiosity flickering for a heartbeat before fear pulls their gaze away. The great hall is already filling when you arrive. Wooden benches are lined up before the dais, where the Lord sits beneath a tapestry depicting a hunting scene. Hounds chasing a stag through a forest. It's meant to inspire thoughts of nobility and skill, but right now it feels like a warning. In this room, you know exactly who the stag is. Two men you haven't seen before stand near the dais. One wears a long red surcoat embroidered with a black cross, a knight, judging by the sword at his hip. The other is in plain brown wool, but the chain around his neck marks him as the steward. Both watch you as the guard brings you forward. The Lord leans slightly forward in his chair. "You've had your rest," he says. His voice carries easily, honed by years of addressing both feasts and executions. "Now, you'll speak in front of witnesses. Your mind flickers through possibilities. Witnesses for what? An inquiry? A judgment? A performance of loyalty?" The last thought chills you most. The knight steps forward. "You were found alive where no one returns alive," he says flatly. "That makes you either blessed or dangerous." The murmur that runs through the hall is quick, sharp. Blessed is good, dangerous is bad. Both can get you killed. The steward unrolls a parchment. "Tell us again how you survived," he says. His voice is less commanding than the knight's, but there's something slippery in it, like oil on water. You recount the events, or at least the version you've chosen. You speak of hiding, of luck, of slipping away in the dark. You omit names. You omit promises. You omit the thing you found buried in the earth that you still keep hidden beneath your clothes. The knight interrupts twice, pressing for details about the attackers, their weapons, their numbers. The steward interrupts only once, to ask whether you were offered help, and from whom. The Lord listens without expression, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. When you finish, he doesn't speak right away. The silence stretches, filled only by the sound of the fire popping in the hearth. Finally, he says, "We cannot keep you here without purpose. The people will wonder. They will invent their own answers. That will not serve me." Your stomach tightens. "You will work," he continues, "under my watch, and you will prove that whatever allowed you to survive has made you useful, not cursed." The knight's jaw tightens, as though he disagrees but won't speak against the decision. The steward just nods slowly, making another mark on his parchment. "What work?" you ask, though you suspect the answer isn't one you'll like. The Lord smiles faintly, not warmly. "We'll start with something simple. There's a matter in the market that needs sorting." You think of the market you saw earlier, the stares, the whispers. Sorting could mean anything from delivering a message to silencing someone permanently. "Go with the steward," the Lord says. "He'll explain." The guard at your side shifts, ready to move you along. But before you turn, the knight steps forward again. "If they fail," he says to the Lord, "you'll wish you'd listened to me." The Lord's smile doesn't fade. If they fail, I'll know they weren't meant to live past the first day. The words follow you out of the hall like a shadow. The steward leads you down a narrower corridor, past storerooms, and through an arched door, into the outer courtyard. The air is colder here, tinged with the smell of smoke from the village chimneys. You can see the market square beyond the gate, its wooden stalls crowded with goods and gossip. As you walk, the steward finally explains, "There's a man in the market selling something he shouldn't have. It's drawing the wrong kind of attention. You will retrieve it, quietly." "What is it?" you ask. He glances at you. "If I told you, you might hesitate. Better you don't know until you see it." You almost laugh. This is the kind of task that in stories ends with the hero being tricked into taking something cursed or forbidden. But this isn't a story, it's your life. And you've already survived more in 24 hours than most people do in a lifetime. As you near the market, you can feel the eyes again, curious, suspicious, fearful. You realize that whatever happens here will decide whether you live through another night. And in this place, the difference between surviving and dying isn't luck. It's how useful you are to the people who own your fate. The market smells of smoke, sweat, and spilt ale. Barrels of salted fish sit beside baskets of root vegetables, while cloth merchants shout about the quality of their dyes. The cobblestones are slick from last night's rain, and every footstep you take seems to echo louder than it should. The steward keeps a steady pace ahead of you, weaving through the crowd without effort. People notice him. Of course they do. The chain around his neck marks his authority, and in this place, authority is both respected and feared. But you're a curiosity, a stranger, a survivor of something you're not supposed to survive. That's dangerous. He stops in front of a modest stall tucked between a potter's table and a vendor selling honey. The man behind the stall is middle-aged, with a sharp, restless gaze. His hands are calloused, but they move with surprising care as he unwraps a bundle of cloth. Inside is a small, black object, polished, heavy-looking. You can't immediately tell what it's made of. Metal? Stone? Whatever it is, it seems to drink the sunlight rather than reflect it. The steward doesn't touch it. "You've been told not to sell this?" he says quietly. The vendor shrugs. "I was told many things. I'm still here." The tension between them is tangible. You realize the steward isn't here to reason. He's here to end the matter. But he's using you to do it. The vendor glances at you. "So this is the one who came back," he says, as if testing the weight of the words. "You're either blessed or cursed." It's the same phrase the knight used, but here it sounds more like a challenge than an observation. "What is it?" you ask, nodding toward the object. "Something from the old times," the vendor says, his voice dropping. "Before the Lord's walls, before the market, before the rules, people say it's worthless, but they're wrong. It's a key." "A key to what?" "That," he says with a faint smirk, "depends on who holds it." The steward cuts in. "You'll hand it over now, quietly, or we'll make it less quiet." The vendor's eyes flicker toward the crowd. Not many people are watching yet. But all it would take is one loud word for every pair of eyes to turn this way. And in a place like this, crowds mean danger. You feel the weight of the moment. If you grab the object, you'll be showing the steward you can be useful. Quick, decisive, loyal. But you'll also be marking yourself in the vendor's memory, and people like him have long memories. Instead, you decide to speak. If it's a key, then it's useless without the lock, you say, keeping your tone steady. And if you keep it here, someone else will come for it, someone worse than us. The vendor studies you. You can see the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of profit against survival. Finally, he wraps the object again and pushes it across the stall toward you. Take it then, he says. But remember, if you ever want to know what it opens, you'll need me. You pocket the bundle, feeling its unnatural coldness seep through the cloth. The steward gives the faintest nod, then turns to leave. On the walk back toward the castle, he speaks without looking at you. You handled that better than I expected. Was that a test? You ask. Everything is a test, he replies. The market was the easy part. The hard part is keeping that without letting anyone know you have it. And what happens if they find out? He glances at you then, his smile almost friendly. Then you'll see why most people here don't survive 2 days. By the time you reach the castle gates, the object in your pocket feels heavier than it should. You're certain it's not just its weight. It's the knowledge of what it represents. The guard at the gate eyes you as you pass. Maybe he's looking for signs of trouble. Maybe he's just curious why you're walking beside the steward like someone who belongs here. Either way, you keep your expression blank. Inside, the steward leads you not back to your room, but deeper into the castle, down a spiral staircase lit by flickering torches. The air grows cooler, damp with the scent of earth and stone. At the bottom is a narrow passage lined with iron-banded doors. The steward stops in front of one and produces a key. You'll keep it here, he says. Safe. He unlocks the door, revealing a small chamber with nothing inside but a table and a single wooden chest. The chest is heavy, reinforced with steel corners. You set the bundle inside. The steward locks it with the same key, then slips the key back into his tunic. Not everything in this castle is for the Lord's eyes alone, he says. Some things are for the right moment. You don't ask whose moment it will be. When you're back in your quarters, the day's events replay in your mind. You've been given a task and passed it. But the way the vendor spoke still lingers. If you ever want to know what it opens, you survived the last 24 hours by instinct, luck, and a little cunning. Now you're starting to understand. Surviving the next 24 will require more than that. It will require choosing the right alliances, the right secrets to keep, and the right moment to act. And every choice will bring you closer to either your salvation or the reason the night will one day be proven right. You wake to a sound that doesn't belong. It's faint at first, a whisper of movement, the shuffle of leather against stone. Your eyes adjust to the dim glow of the embers in your hearth. The rest of the room is a patchwork of deep shadows and orange flickers, every corner a place where something could be hiding. The sound comes again, this time from the window. You slip from the bed silently, your bare feet finding the cold flagstones. The air is sharper at night here, as if the walls themselves exhale the chill once the sun goes down. The shutters are half open. A thread of moonlight spills through, silvering the edge of the table. And on that table is something that wasn't there when you lay down to sleep. A folded scrap of parchment, weighted by a small stone. You glance outside before touching it. The courtyard below is empty, save for the faint glow of a lantern moving along the wall walk. No figure waits in the shadows. No footsteps hurry away. When you finally pick up the parchment, the handwriting is small, neat, and precise. If you still have it, meet me at the west well before the third bell. If you don't, this will be the last time I write. There's no signature, but you know who it's from. The vendor. Your first thought is how he knew where you were staying. Your second thought is whether the steward would consider this an opportunity or a betrayal. The bells of the keep toll the hour. The first one is still echoing when you slip into your boots and cloak. You don't take a lantern. Light draws attention. The corridors are quieter at night, though not empty. Servants move in pairs, guards in threes. You keep your hood low, matching their pace when you pass and ducking into side passages when you hear voices ahead. The west well is outside the inner wall, beyond the stables. It takes longer to reach than you expect. The paths wind like someone designed them to confuse intruders, which you realize is exactly the point. By the time you arrive, the third bell is close. The vendor is already there, leaning against the stone lip of the well as though he's been waiting for hours. His expression is unreadable in the moonlight. "You came," he says. "I still have it," you answer. He tilts his head, studying you. "Good. Then you haven't let the wrong hands close around it yet?" "What does it open?" "Not a door," he says. "A choice." Before you can press him, he produces a small bundle from his own cloak. Inside is a folded map, crude, but detailed enough to show the outer hills, the river bends, and a mark where no building stands now. "This is where the lock is," he says, "but it won't stay unguarded for long." You glance down at the map, then back at him. "And what's in it for you?" He smiles faintly. "Survival, same as you. But survival is easier when certain things change hands." A rustle breaks the stillness, the unmistakable sound of someone stepping onto gravel. The vendor's smile vanishes. "Hide that," he says sharply, shoving the map into your hands. Two figures step from the shadows, not guards. Their clothing is darker, fitted for movement, not ceremony. The shorter one carries a crossbow. The taller's hand rests on the hilt of a curved blade. The vendor steps in front of you. "Market's closed, friends," he says lightly. The crossbowman raises his weapon. "We'll take the key." You feel the cold shape of it through your cloak pocket. You could hand it over and walk away alive. But something in the vendor's posture tells you that won't work. They'll kill you both to keep the trail cold. The first bolt hisses past your ear before you move. You dive toward the taller figure, aiming low, catching him at the knees. The vendor is already in motion, slamming the crossbow aside with a swift crack of wood. The fight is fast, messy, and brutal. The taller man recovers enough to draw his blade, but the vendor's knife flashes in the dark, catching him across the forearm. He drops it with a hiss. By the time you're both breathing hard, the attackers are on the ground, alive, but not conscious. "We can't stay," the vendor says. "Not here, not tonight." He pulls you away from the well and down a narrow path you didn't notice before, half hidden by overgrown ivy. It leads to the outer wall, where a section of stones looks wrong, newer. The vendor presses his shoulder to one, and the wall shifts just enough to let a person through. "This is how we'll reach the lock," he says, "when it's time. Until then, you keep breathing, and you keep them from knowing you have it. Before you can ask when that time will be, he's already slipping through the gap." The wall closes again, leaving you in the moonlit courtyard with the sound of distant bells. You return to your quarters the way you came, unnoticed, but the cold weight in your pocket feels heavier than ever. The night has given you answers, and twice as many questions. You survived the first day, you survived the second, but now you're starting to see each day isn't just survival. It's a test you didn't agree to take, and you're not sure what happens if you fail. You wake later than usual. The shutters are open, letting in the cold light of morning. The air smells faintly of ash and something sharper. Boiled vinegar, perhaps. A sign the servants have been scrubbing floors nearby. Your boots are still damp from last night's journey. You kick them further under the bed before anyone notices. A knock comes almost immediately. "Enter," you call, forcing your voice to sound even. It's not a servant who steps through the door. It's the steward. He fills the frame, tall and lean, his hands folded neatly behind his back. His clothing is immaculate. Black tunic, silver chain at the collar, every crease perfect. His eyes, though, are what people remember, sharp as a hawk's, always watching, always measuring. "You missed the morning meal," he says. "I wasn't hungry." His gaze moves slowly around the room, pausing on the table, the hearth, the floor near the bed. "And yet, you were up late. I heard movement in the west corridors after the second bell." Few have reason to be there. You keep your breathing steady. "I couldn't sleep. Thought a walk might help." A walk. He repeats the word as though tasting it. The west corridors lead nowhere, unless one is going outside the walls. Were you? You let a silence stretch, not too long, not too short, before you answer. No. He watches you for another moment, then steps closer, just enough to make the space feel too small. This keep has rules for a reason. Those who stray often find trouble, and trouble tends to follow them back. You know better than to argue. You incline your head slightly, the closest thing to a bow without bending the knee. He straightens. "The Lord has asked for your presence this afternoon. Until then, I suggest you remain in your quarters." The steward leaves without another word, but you hear the click of the lock as the door closes. You exhale slowly. He's suspicious. Maybe not of the key itself, but of your movements. And suspicion in this place is often as dangerous as proof. Hours pass in silence. You pace the room, check the shutters, test the door. The lock is sturdy, the hinges stronger. They've caged you politely, but it's still a cage. When a knock comes again, it's softer. A servant's voice calls through the wood. Summons from the Lord. The corridors are busier now, the noise of midday echoing off the high ceilings. You follow the servant toward the main hall, where sunlight filters through tall windows, casting gold onto the flagstones. The Lord sits at the high table. He is younger than most expect. His hair still dark, though streaked with silver at the temples. His eyes are warmer than the steward's, but no less calculating. "You've been a guest here for some time now," he begins, his voice smooth, carrying easily through the chamber. "I've been told you have an eye for opportunity. You say nothing, waiting for the trap. I value those who see beyond the obvious," he continues. "The steward says you wander at night. That can mean many things: curiosity, restlessness, or perhaps searching. Your heart beats louder in your ears." He leans forward slightly. "Tell me, do you know of the lock in the outer hills?" The words hang between you, It's the first time someone in this keep has acknowledged it openly. I've heard rumors, you say carefully. The Lord's smile is faint. Rumors are the beginning of truth. That lock has been there for generations, and no one has opened it. Many have tried, many have vanished. The steward believes it is nothing more than a story. I believe otherwise. He gestures, and a servant pours dark wine into a cup at your side. If someone were to find a key, he says, and bring it to me, they would have my gratitude, and more. Your hand rests on your lap, close to the pocket where the key lies. You can feel its weight even now. I'll keep that in mind, you answer. The Lord studies you for a long moment. Do more than that. The audience ends as abruptly as it began. You are escorted back to your quarters, the lock clicking once again behind you. The vendor's warning echoes in your mind. Keep them from knowing you have it. But now the Lord himself has asked for it, and in this place, refusing a request from the highest seat can be as dangerous as any knife in the dark. That night, the shutters remain closed, the embers burn low, and you sit at the edge of your bed, turning the decision over in your mind. One thing is certain, you can't keep the key hidden here much longer. The steward's eyes are everywhere, and the Lord's reach is farther than you thought. You survived another day, but each conversation feels like a move in a game you don't yet understand, and the board is closing in. You wait until the corridors are quiet again. The moon is hidden behind a bank of clouds, and the wind rattles the shutters softly. That sound, the intermittent tapping of wood, covers the faintest rustle as you pull the vendor's map from its hiding place. By the light of a single candle, you spread the parchment across the table. At first glance, it's the same as before. Lines marking the outer hills, a faint sketch of the lock's shape, the winding paths that lead to it. But now, in the candle's flicker, you notice something you didn't see before. Tiny ink marks, no bigger than flecks, dot the margins. They aren't random. They form a pattern that becomes clearer when you tilt the parchment and catch the reflection of waxy residue. You drag the candle closer. The heat warms the parchment, and slowly, faint lines appear, drawn in something that only reveals itself when exposed to warmth. The hidden ink forms a second map layered over the first. This one shows routes not through the hills, but under them, narrow tunnels winding like veins, leading to points far from the main roads. One tunnel ends directly beneath the lock's marked location. You run your finger along the faintest of those paths. It begins near the keep, or rather, beneath it. There's an entry somewhere within these walls leading to the old mining tunnels that predate the fort's construction. The vendor hadn't mentioned this. Either he didn't know or he didn't want to say. A soft sound interrupts your thoughts. The creak of a floorboard just beyond the door. You roll the map quickly, tucking it back into its hiding place between the mattress and the bed frame. The silence stretches. Whoever it was moves on. Sleep comes fitfully, if at all. You dream of narrow tunnels, the smell of damp stone, and the echo of footsteps behind you. By morning, you have decided you can't risk searching for the tunnel entrance during the day. Too many eyes, too many questions. You'll have to move at night, and for that, you'll need an excuse to avoid the steward's inspections. When the summons comes for the midday meal, you go willingly. The great hall hums with voices. Traders have come from the lowlands, bringing bolts of dyed cloth, jars of pickled roots, and news from the southern roads. One trader, a small man with a nervous smile, catches your attention. He's selling lanterns, not the heavy iron kind used in the keep, but small tin ones with mirrored interiors, light enough to carry in one hand and bright enough to cut through darkness. You approach casually, exchanging a few coins for a lantern and a handful of candles. To the steward, it's an innocent purchase. Perhaps you fear the dark corridors of the keep, but in truth, it's a tool. That night, when the watch changes and the hallways fall into brief stillness, you slip from your room. The lantern is cold in your hand, its light hidden for now. You keep to the less traveled passages, counting steps, noting turns. Near the old armory, you find what you've been searching for. A door recessed into the wall, half covered by hanging cloth. It's smaller than the others, meant for servants long ago. The iron latch resists at first, but with a steady push, it gives way. The air beyond is different, cooler with a faint smell of minerals and dust. You light the lantern and step inside. The narrow staircase descends in tight spirals, each step worn by centuries of use. The sound of your boots is swallowed by the stone. At the bottom, the space opens into a low tunnel, barely tall enough to stand upright. The hidden map was right. The walls bear the marks of old mining, grooves cut by hand tools, streaks of quartz glinting faintly in the lantern light. You walk slowly, counting each turn against the memory of the parchment. The tunnel bends sharply, then narrows further. Here, the air feels heavier, as though it hasn't been disturbed in years. A faint sound reaches you, a drip of water somewhere ahead. You follow it, the tunnel sloping downward until you find a small underground pool. Its surface reflects the lantern's glow, but the water is too deep to see the bottom. On the far side of the pool, a stone arch marks another passage. Carved into the keystone is a symbol you've seen before. On the lock itself, you stand there for a long moment, lantern in hand, knowing that you've found a direct route. But the tunnels are dangerous. If the steward, or worse, the Lord, learns you're here, the consequences will be immediate. You decide to turn back for now. Better to prepare food, water, and perhaps a rope for the descent beyond the arch. When you return to your room, the shutters are still closed, but a small folded slip of parchment sits on your table. No one saw fit to announce their presence. Unfolding it, you read the single line inside. You are not the only one with the map. The candle gutters in the draft, and you realize the second game has already begun. The note lies on the table, the black ink still fresh enough to gleam in the candlelight. The handwriting is quick but deliberate, a hand used to leaving warnings or perhaps challenges. You read the line again. You are not the only one with the map. Your first instinct is to check the hiding place. You slide your hand between the mattress and the bed frame. The map is still there, rolled tightly. You unroll it just enough to see the hidden ink. The faint, heat-borne lines are unchanged. So whoever left the note doesn't necessarily have your map. They have a map. Or worse, they know about the tunnels because they've been in them. The thought makes the back of your neck prickle. You tuck the map away again and force yourself to act as though nothing is wrong. If the person is watching you, they'll be looking for a reaction. Instead, you go to the hall for the morning meal, speak politely to the steward, and nod to the guards. But beneath that calm, you're already making a plan. You'll return to the tunnel tonight, and this time, you'll be ready. The day passes in slow increments. Traders leave, taking the bustle of the morning with them. The keep settles back into its routine. By evening, a light rain begins to fall, tapping against the shutters and cloaking smaller sounds. When the watch changes, you slip into the old servant's door again. The lantern is ready in your pack, but for now, you move in darkness, letting your eyes adjust. The spiral stairs feel steeper this time, your steps quieter. At the bottom, you light the lantern, shielding its glow with your hand. The tunnel stretches ahead, exactly as before. Rough-hewn walls, glints of quartz, the faint drip of water. But now, you look closer. There, in the dust. Footprints, not yours. You crouch, studying them. The edges are sharp. The impressions still holding their shape. Whoever made them walked through here not long ago. Perhaps hours, not days. You follow them, keeping your breathing slow. They lead toward the underground pool. You half expect to hear movement ahead, but the only sound is the steady drip. The pool is unchanged, its still surface reflecting your light. The footprints continue around the left edge, stopping just before the carved arch. You examine the keystone again. The symbol is clearer now in the lantern light, an intricate knot, with a center that seems to twist inward no matter how you look at it. The other side of the arch is darkness. You step closer, then stop. Something's wrong. The air coming from the passage is warmer than the rest of the tunnel, faintly, but enough to notice. You listen, holding your breath. There it is, a sound, deep in the distance, not dripping water, not stone shifting. Breathing, you turn the lantern low, almost extinguishing it. The sound doesn't change. Whoever or whatever is on the other side of that arch is breathing slowly, like they've been there a long time. Waiting. You consider calling out, but every instinct warns against it. Instead, you step back, careful not to disturb the footprints. You'll need more than a lantern and nerve for what lies beyond this arch. The walk back feels longer. Every shadow along the tunnel's walls seems sharper. At the top of the spiral stairs, you pause, listening for pursuit. Nothing. When you push open the servant's door, you hear another sound. Faint footsteps in the corridor above. You wait until they fade, then make your way to your room. Another note is waiting on the table. This one reads, "You're late." The ink is smudged, as though written quickly and folded before it dried. Whoever they are, they knew you'd be in the tunnel tonight. You set the note down, every sense on edge. The game isn't just about finding the lock anymore. It's about who gets there first. And now, it seems, you're already behind. You don't sleep. The rain outside keeps up its rhythm, but it's not enough to drown out the sound of your thoughts, or the creak of movement in the hall now and then. Every time you close your eyes, you see that second note. You're late, not "I saw you" or "stay away." Just those two words, as if the writer is claiming the tunnel as theirs. By the time dawn filters through the shutters, you've made your choice. You're going back, but you're going earlier, before nightfall. Whoever left the note seems to think they control the schedule. Not today. You take your breakfast in silence, watching the hall for the flicker of an eye that might linger too long. A servant spills a pitcher. A guard shifts his weight and adjusts his spear. No one seems to be paying you undue attention, but you've learned that doesn't mean much. By mid-afternoon, you've managed to slip away. You've packed differently this time. A second lantern, a length of rope, a small knife strapped under your sleeve. The tunnel is as damp as ever, but the air feels charged, like before a storm. You follow the familiar path, spiral stairs, damp stone, footprints in the dust. They're fresher today. You keep your lantern low and move quickly. The footprints lead again toward the pool, but this time the still surface is disturbed. Small ripples radiate toward the stone edge, vanishing almost as soon as they appear. You freeze. From the other side of the carved arch comes a flicker of light, someone else's lantern, its glow dancing faintly on the walls. You take a slow step forward, keeping your own lantern hidden behind your leg. A figure steps through. They're not tall, but they move with deliberate precision. A hood shadows their face, but you catch a glimpse. Sharp cheekbones, a thin scar from jaw to ear. In their left hand, they carry a rolled parchment. Your stomach tightens. Another map. They stop when they see you, their shoulders tensing. "So," they say, voice low but clear, "you're the one." You keep your tone even. "Depends on what you mean." They tilt their head, studying you as though weighing your value. "You've been in the tunnels twice now. That means you know something, or you've seen something." "Maybe," you answer. "Why does it matter to you?" They step closer, and you notice their right hand never leaves the fold of their cloak. "Because," they say, "there's only one door worth finding down here, and only room for one to pass through it before it closes. You can hear your pulse in your ears." "Then why warn me?" A faint smile touches their mouth. "I didn't warn you. I invited you to see if you're quick enough to keep up." They turn, stepping back toward the arch, their lantern swinging slightly. "If you want the lock, follow me. If you want to live, forget you ever saw me." Your fingers tighten around your lantern handle. You could turn back, but you know you won't. You step through the arch after them. The air changes instantly, warmer, yes, but also filled with a faint metallic tang, like blood or rust. The walls are smoother here, marked with faint carvings you don't recognize. The stranger moves quickly, their light bobbing ahead of you. You follow, noting each turn, each branching passage. You try to count your steps, but the floor slopes and curves, disorienting you. At last, they stop before a massive door set into the rock itself. It's not wood or iron, but something darker, with a sheen that catches the lantern light oddly. In the center is a lock unlike anything you've seen, a mechanism of interlocking rings, each etched with symbols. The stranger runs a finger over the outermost ring. "This," they say, "is where the maps lead. This is the reason people vanish in the tunnels." But it's not opening without the right key. "And you have it?" you ask. They look at you sharply. "If I did, we wouldn't be talking." A distant sound echoes through the tunnel, a low, resonant thud. The stranger's expression hardens. "They're coming." You glance back into the dark. "Who?" "You'll see." They slip the map back into their cloak and start moving fast the way you came. You follow, the sound behind you growing louder. Not footsteps, but something heavier, dragging against the stone. When you reach the arch again, they pause just long enough to say, "Next time, bring your map. We'll need both." Then they vanish into the shadows. You stand there, breathing hard, lantern trembling in your grip. The dragging sound is closer now. You don't wait to see what's making it. You run. By the time you reach the spiral stairs, the sound has faded, but it's still in your head, deep and heavy, like something that's not finished with you. And maybe, you think as you climb, it isn't. You wake to the sound of voices drifting through your window. The market below is already alive. Someone is calling out the price of bread, another advertising brass fittings. But it's the muffled exchange in the corner of the square that catches your ear. Low, quick, almost furtive. You dress quickly, slipping the small knife back under your sleeve. The image of the strange lock from last night lingers in your mind. The shifting rings, the alien symbols etched into their surfaces. Whatever was behind that door, the stranger believed it was worth more than both your lives combined. The market is crowded today. Stalls of fruit spill color into the air, their scent mixing with roasting meat and the metallic tang of worked iron. But your eyes aren't on the wares. They're on the people. You scan for anyone carrying rolled parchment or walking like they have somewhere to be without wanting to be seen. It's near the far edge of the market, beyond the blacksmith's awning, that you spot him. A man in a long patched coat, fingering something small and metallic in his palm as he talks to a vendor. You edge closer, pretending to study a row of knives on display. The thing in his hand catches the sun, a fragment of something circular, etched with patterns that curl like the ones on the tunnel door. Your pulse quickens. He pockets it quickly, mutters a word to the vendor, and starts moving toward the narrow lanes that snake away from the square. You follow. It's not easy. He weaves through the crowd with the instinct of someone who's been followed before. Twice he stops suddenly, glancing back over his shoulder. Both times, you duck into stalls, pretending to haggle. Finally, he turns into an alley that's quiet, except for the hum of flies near an overturned barrel. You slip in after him and stop. He's gone. The alley dead ends in a wall of stacked crates. But then you notice it. The faint outline of a door between them, cleverly hidden behind warped planks. Before you can move closer, a voice says, "Looking for something?" You turn slowly. It's the man in the patched coat, but now his hand rests lightly on the hilt of a short sword. His eyes are pale, almost gray, and they don't blink much. "That piece," you say, keeping your tone level. "It matches something I've seen." His mouth curves into something like a smile, but it's humorless. "I doubt it. Unless you've been somewhere you shouldn't." "I have." The smile fades. "Then you've seen the door." You don't answer. You don't need to. The look in his eyes says he already knows. "What's it worth to you?" he asks. You consider your answer carefully. Not as much as it's worth to the one who can open it. That earns you a long, appraising look. Smart. But here's the problem. There's more than one piece, and no one knows where they all are, except maybe. He lets the thought trail off, stepping closer. Except who? Except the ones who built it. The words hang heavy in the narrow alley. He slides the fragment from his pocket, holding it between two fingers. Up close, you can see that the symbols are shallowly carved, almost worn smooth with time. "This," he says, "is one of 4. Put them together. You get the key. Get the key. You get the door." "And what's behind the door?" you ask. He chuckles. A dry, unpleasant sound. Ask 10 people, you'll get 10 answers. Some say gold. Some say weapons. Some say a way out. You think of the stranger in the tunnel, the warning in their voice. Whatever's behind that door, it's not just treasure. What do you want for it? You ask. His eyes sharpen. A trade. I give you this piece, you bring me another. From the one who's been in the tunnels longer than either of us. And who's that? He leans in, close enough for you to smell the faint scent of damp wool on his coat. The woman in the red scarf. She's been collecting pieces for years. Never sells, never trades, but she walks the market every other dawn. You take the fragment when he offers it, the metal cold against your palm. One piece, he says. 2 more, and we'll both see what's behind that door. You leave the alley quickly, tucking the fragment deep into your coat. The market noise feels louder now, the air tighter. Somewhere in the press of bodies, a woman in a red scarf is moving, and if you want to find her before dawn, you'll have to start now. But you can't shake the feeling that for every step you take, someone else is already 3 ahead of you. And in this game, you're starting to wonder if catching up is even possible. Dawn comes slow, gray light creeping between the slats of the shutters. You've barely slept. The fragment's weight in your pocket was enough to keep your mind running long past midnight. The market isn't yet awake, but there are signs of it. The thump of crates being set down, the creak of cartwheels on wet stone. You pull your coat tighter and step into the cold air. She's supposed to be here today. The woman in the red scarf. The patched coat man's words echo in your head. She never sells, never trades, which means she's not here for profit. People like that don't move through the market without reason, and if she's been collecting fragments for years, she's patient. Dangerous. You position yourself near the baker's stall, where the smell of warm bread masks the sour tang of the alleys. From here, you can see the main path into the square. At first, it's just vendors setting up, a fisherman laying out his catch on beds of crushed ice, a woman stacking clay jars in neat pyramids, a boy sweeping dust from the boards of a cart. Then you see her. She walks like she's measuring each step, her boots making no sound on the stones. The scarf, deep crimson, frayed at the ends, is wound twice around her neck, the tail tucked close. She carries a small satchel slung across her shoulder, the kind that could hide something flat and heavy. She doesn't browse, doesn't stop to greet anyone. She moves along the far edge of the market, eyes scanning, pausing only when someone passes too close. You shadow her, keeping 3 stalls between you at all times. She turns once, glancing over her shoulder, and you quickly duck behind a stand of hanging lanterns. When she moves again, it's toward the northern end of the square, toward the old quarter, where the streets are narrow and the shadows deep even in daylight. You follow. The vendors thin out here, replaced by shuttered windows and doorways that open into dim rooms. She stops at one, knocks twice, then once more. The door opens just enough for her to slip inside. You wait. A man passes, giving you a quick, suspicious look. You pretend to adjust your bootlaces, but your eyes stay fixed on the door. Minutes pass. Then it opens again, and she's there, but her satchel is gone. She starts back toward the market, and you let her pass before you slip to the door and knock the same way she did. 2, then 1. The door opens a crack, and a face peers out. A boy, no more than 12, eyes sharp as glass. She didn't tell me she had company, he says. She didn't, you reply, stepping forward just enough to make him lean back. but she left something here. I need it. His eyes narrow. Everyone needs it. No one gets it. He shuts the door. You press your ear to the wood, but hear nothing. Frustration gnaws at you. Whatever she brought here, it's a piece of the puzzle, maybe even another fragment. And now it's behind a door guarded by a boy who looks like he'd bite before he'd talk. You circle the block, looking for another way in. The building backs onto a narrow lane where rainwater pools in broken stones. You find a shutter halfway open and slip inside. The room smells of dust and iron. Shelves line the walls, filled with jars, rolled parchment, and small wooden boxes. And there, on the table in the center, is a fragment. It's larger than the one in your pocket, the symbols etched more deeply, but there's no time to study it. Footsteps are coming. You grab it and slide it into your coat, just as the door creaks open. The boy steps in, his eyes going from the empty table to you in an instant. He doesn't shout, he just runs. You curse and follow, boots slipping on the wet stones as you burst into the lane. He's fast, darting between crates, leaping over puddles, but fear makes you quicker. You catch him near the market edge, grabbing his arm before he can vanish into the crowd. I don't want to hurt you, you say, trying to catch your breath. But I need to know, who gave you that piece? His eyes flash, but he doesn't answer. Then he spits one word like it's a curse. Keeper! Before you can ask more, he twists free and disappears into the press of bodies. You stand there, the noise of the market swelling around you, the fragment heavy in your coat. 2 pieces now, half the key. And somewhere out there, the keeper, whoever they are, is already moving to stop you from finding the rest. The word clings to you all afternoon. Keeper. It feels like a title, not a name. One that carries weight, like a warning or a promise. You've heard whispers before. A figure who moves between the city's undercurrents, trading in things too dangerous for open hands. But whispers have a way of growing in the telling, and you've never known how much to believe. Now, with the second fragment pressing against your ribs, you don't have the luxury of doubt. The market fades behind you as you turn down a street that narrows until the sky is little more than a strip of pale light above. Here, the air smells of old stone and river damp. You know these streets. They're the kind people pass through quickly, heads down, pockets guarded. Your plan is simple. Find someone who knows the keeper, then follow the trail until it leads you face to face. It takes 3 tries before you find someone willing to talk. A man with a beard like tangled rope leans in close, his breath hot with ale. You don't find the keeper, he says. The keeper finds you, and when they do, you'll wish you'd stayed lost. Where? You press? He shrugs, but his eyes flick toward the river. That's enough. You follow the river's edge until the noise of the city dies, replaced by the soft slap of water against rotting wood. The warehouses here lean toward each other like old drunks, their windows blind, their doors swollen with damp. Then you see it, a narrow archway in the brick, half hidden by hanging nets. A man steps from the shadows, blocking the way. His coat is heavy, his face unreadable. Business? He asks. Keeper, you reply. He studies you for a long moment before stepping aside. Inside, the air is colder. A single lantern burns at the far end, casting light across a long table. On it, laid out like relics, are fragments. Dozens of them, each marked with those strange twisting symbols. And behind them stands the keeper. Not a towering figure as you imagined, but a woman, Thin, sharp-featured, eyes like slate. Her hair is streaked with silver, though she can't be more than 40. "You've been busy," she says, her gaze flicking to your coat as if she can see the weight of the fragments through the fabric. You say nothing. She steps closer, the light catching on a small scar at her temple. 2 pieces already. That's impressive. Risky, but impressive. "What are they?" you ask. She smiles faintly, like a teacher amused by a slow student. "Keys to something old, something that sleeps beneath our feet. And if it wakes," her smile fades, "then the world changes, and not for the better." She gestures to the table. You could hand them over, walk away, live out your days without worrying about what's coming. You know the offer is false. People like her don't let go of loose ends. Instead, you reach into your coat and place the smaller of your 2 fragments on the table. "Trade," you say. "Information for information." Her eyes narrow. "You're bold or foolish. Both," you admit. She laughs once, short and sharp, then nods. "Very well. You want to know where the next piece lies? It's in the crypts, old catacombs beneath the city. But be warned, they're not empty." "What's in them?" She leans close enough that you can smell the faint tang of iron on her breath. Things that were buried for a reason. Before you can reply, she sweeps the smaller fragment into her satchel and turns away. "You have until sundown tomorrow. After that, the crypts won't be yours to search." The man at the door appears again, hand resting on the hilt of a knife. You leave without looking back, the second fragment still safe in your coat, your mind already turning toward the catacombs. The river smells sharper now, the wind cutting cold through your coat. 2 pieces in hand, the third waiting in the dark beneath the city. And the keeper, watching from the shadows, waiting to see if you'll make it back alive. The keeper's warning lingers in your head long after you've left her hidden den. Things that were buried for a reason. The city above feels different now. Every cobblestone, every drain grating, every shadowed doorway hides the possibility of something ancient and dangerous breathing just beneath. The sun hangs low, staining the rooftops in orange and red, as though the whole place is blushing at its own secrets. You start your preparations. The catacombs aren't marked on any official map, at least not the part you need. The public tours go only so far before the passages are sealed off. What lies beyond is locked, forgotten, or deliberately erased. At a stall near the edge of the market, you purchase a lantern and 3 vials of oil. The vendor, a man with hands like tree roots, watches you with a wary squint. "Going below?" he asks. "Just curious," you say. He shakes his head. "Curiosity is a quick way to end up as bones down there. The entrance you need isn't in the city proper. It's down near the oldest part of the riverside, where moss stains the walls and the air smells of iron and rot. The doorway is a squat arch, half hidden behind piles of discarded crates. You'd have missed it if you didn't know what you were looking for. The lock is rusted, the wood swollen from decades of damp, but the keeper's directions were precise. 3 steps left, a push on the brick that juts out just enough, and the door gives way with a groan that seems too loud in the quiet. Inside, the air changes immediately. It's colder, heavier, with a faint sweetness that makes your stomach tighten. The lantern's light stretches down a corridor of rough stone, catching on carvings that have almost faded away, spirals, animal shapes, faces with empty eyes. You descend a narrow stair, the sound of your own footsteps muffled by centuries of dust. The deeper you go, the more the world above fades. The air here doesn't move. It sits in your lungs like it's been waiting for you, heavy and damp. The first chamber is small, round, its walls lined with niches. Some hold bones, stacked neatly. Others are empty, the dust disturbed by something more recent than time. You can't shake the feeling that the empty ones are waiting. You press on. The passage narrows, forcing you to turn sideways in places. The lantern's light wavers as if nervous. Then you hear it, the faint sound of water dripping somewhere ahead. But it's not the only sound. Something is breathing in the dark. You freeze. The breath is slow, deliberate, and close. The lantern's glow catches on movement just ahead, a shape pulling back into shadow. Instinct tells you to run, but the keeper's deadline presses in your mind. You move forward, slow and steady, the sound of your own pulse loud in your ears. The passage opens into a larger chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. At the center is a stone altar, cracked but still solid, and on it rests the third fragment. It's larger than the others, its edges jagged, its surface covered in those same twisting symbols. Even from here, you can feel the hum of it, like it's alive. You step closer, but the breathing grows louder. From the shadows behind the altar, something unfolds itself. At first, you think it's a man, but its limbs are too long, its movements too fluid. Its skin is pale as wax, its eyes reflecting the lantern's light in a sickly yellow. It doesn't attack. It simply watches. You realize the creature is standing between you and the only other exit. If you take the fragment, you'll have to pass it. Your hand tightens on the lantern. There's no choice. You step up to the altar and lift the fragment. It's heavier than it looks, the hum in your bones growing stronger. The creature tilts its head, the movement strangely bird-like. For a long, breathless moment, neither of you moves. Then it steps aside, melting into the dark as if it had never been there. You don't question the gift. You take the narrow passage behind the altar, the stone walls closing in around you. By the time you reach the surface, the sky is deep blue, and the city's lights glitter like a scattering of stars. 3 pieces now, and somewhere the keeper is waiting to see what you'll do with them. Night has fully settled over the city, folding the streets into soft shadows. You can feel the weight of the 3 fragments burning quietly beneath your coat, a secret burden pressed close to your chest. The keeper's words echo in your mind. You have until sundown tomorrow, but that time is nearly spent. You find yourself standing before the grand manor of the Lord, a building heavy with centuries of history and whispered power. The gates are wrought iron, twisted into strange shapes that resemble both vines and serpents. You push them open, the metal groaning softly as if warning you away. Inside, the air is different, thick with the scent of candle wax and old parchment. The Lord's chamber is dimly lit, shadows pooling around a high-backed chair carved from dark oak. A man sits there, draped in robes embroidered with gold thread, his face lined and stern beneath a crown that seems too heavy even for a king. He regards you silently as you step forward, fragments laid out carefully on a nearby table. The room hums with an unspoken tension. like the pause before a storm. "You have done well to come this far," he says at last, voice low and steady. "But the final step is not one taken lightly." You nod, heart pounding but steady. "I have the fragments. I want to know what's behind the door." He gestures, and a servant brings forward a heavy iron key, its teeth jagged and strange. "This key fits the fragments. Once used, it will open the door you seek. But beware, unlocking it will change more than just your fate." You remember the keeper's warning about the world changing, and you wonder if the Lord is friend or foe in this tale. As you prepare to turn the key, a memory surfaces, the pale creature in the catacombs, its yellow eyes watching you with unsettling calm. What else lurks beyond the door? What trials remain? The Lord leans forward, voice dropping to a whisper. Historians still argue whether what lies beyond is treasure or curse. Some say it holds knowledge that could save or destroy kingdoms. You take a deep breath, hand steady. The key slides into the lock, the metal cold and unforgiving. The door creaks open, revealing darkness thick and deep. Step by step, you cross the threshold, knowing this journey has only just begun. The door swings slowly shut behind you, muffling the sounds of the world you've left behind. Darkness wraps around you like a soft blanket, quiet and still. Your breath slows, deep and even, matching the calm pulse of the hidden chamber. The fragments you carried now rest silently on the stone floor, their strange symbols glowing faintly before fading into shadow. Whatever secrets they held, whatever power they promised, feel distant now, like a story told just before sleep, half remembered and gently fading. Outside, the night hums softly, crickets calling, leaves rustling, a distant owl's gentle hoot. You can imagine the moon tracing silver paths across the cobblestones, the city breathing beneath a veil of stars. You, too, are ready to rest. The weight of the day's trials slips away, replaced by a warm stillness. Imagine yourself lying back on soft moss under a wide-open sky. The cool night air brushing your skin and the faint scent of earth and pine filling your lungs. Each breath carries you closer to that place between waking and dreaming, where stories mingle with quiet peace. No more secrets need chasing tonight. No more shadows lurk just out of sight. Just you, the calm, dark, and the steady rhythm of your own heart. So let your thoughts drift like autumn leaves on a gentle breeze. Let the quiet cradle you, soothing and soft. The journey has been long, but now it's time to let go. Sleep well, and when you wake, may the day be kinder than you imagine.